Hello everyone, this is Fanfic Audiobook. Here you find original fan made audio stories.
Greek mythology, starting with becoming the god of the breeze. Part 4. Facing the single combat request from the Egyptian pantheon faction, the chaos gods also tacitly agreed to this proposal. In their view, avoiding a large-scale war was for the best. Although fighting on home turf provided advantage bonuses, it would also cause solid, tangible damage to Chaos World. The development of Chaos World over tens of millions of years would likely be completely ruined because of this war. But those high-ranking gods, especially the primordial deities led by Tartarus and Pontus, couldn't help but furrow their brows slightly when they saw that the target chosen by the opponent was Canas. Tartarus did not know Canas, but the scent exclusively belonging to Redemption and Breeze on the other party made it feel very familiar. Could he be the deity who helped me share a portion of the pressure from the spacetime cracks? Turns out he's just a little fellow. With Tartarus's strength, it could naturally see through Canas's age and power at a glance. Breeze had only been born for a few hundred years. For Tartarus, who had existed since the creation of the world, a few hundred years didn't even account for a single day in proportion to it. Yet it was precisely these few hundred years that allowed a weak demigod to grow into an existence capable of helping it share the erosion of the spacetime cracks. For such an existence, Tartarus had to protect him well. Therefore, it maintained an opposing view regarding Canas entering the battle. Although that little fellow on the opposite side also had average strength, his age was much older than Canas's, and his combat experience and development of divine authority were also stronger than Canas's. If they really fought, Canas would likely suffer losses. Similarly, Pontus thought the same way. It was just that his thoughts were much simpler. He looked at the numerous, ready-to-go titans behind him, as well as Tartarus and sun god Ra who were at the same aura level as him, a bloodthirsty smile appearing on his face. Single combat. Single my ass. Just fight directly. Fuck his mother. In his view, his side had more people and greater strength, so fighting would definitely give his side the advantage. Since they had the advantage, what the hell was the point of single combat? My progeny, gods of the marine pantheon, charge with me. At the order, 10,000 waves surged. Nerus, Taumas, Phorcys, Ceto, Eurybia, and other gods of the marine pantheon moved out together, followed closely by countless sea monster thralls and the Titan's army. The surging ocean, carrying towering divine power, crushed tyrannically toward the Egyptian pantheon array. The situation of the entire battlefield was instantly and completely detonated by Pontus alone. On the current battlefield, in terms of status and strength, only Tartarus and Pontus sat at the very top. Earth Mother Gaia, goddess of night Nyx, and other remaining primordial gods did not personally visit this place, causing the several pantheons of Earth, Night, and Mount Othras to be leaderless and fight each on their own. The leaderless gods were already flustered and hesitant in advancing or retreating, seeing Pontus, one of the strongest combat powers, initiate the battle first, they instantly broke free from all shackles. Charge! Unknowingly which god roared in anger first, the next moment, countless gods, thralls, and armies of the Earth Pantheon, Night Pantheon, and Mount Othras Pantheon all mobilized. The silent battlefield boiled completely, divine brilliance filled the sky intersecting and bursting, and an all-heaven melee, unprecedented since eternity, suddenly erupted. Thanks to Canas's background, parts of the gods from the Earth Pantheon and his own celestial pantheon split off to fight alongside him. And Canas placed his primary target on Set. Ha 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 ha. I have come. Ugly false god. He threw back his head and laughed loudly, completely different from his previous gentle and tranquil appearance. He was no Mr. Nice Guy. Facing enemies, facing invaders, what he needed to do was be more ruthless and stronger than the other party. Thus, the violent and bellicose side within him was completely released by him at this moment. This time, he wanted to kill Set in his most powerful state and make the other's divine authority his own. Immediately afterward, a dark wind vortex condensed in his palm, and his exclusive divine artifact Charybdis took shape instantly. Biting wind blades surrounded his body, storms circulated and entwined, integrating offense and defense with towering might. Stepping on the currents of wind, his figure turned into a high-speed afterimage, charging straight toward the ferocious half-human, half-beast figure ahead. Ant. You are courting death. The furious roar that shook the sky exploded suddenly. The yellow sand around Set instantly ran wild and churned, and the earth-yellow storm swept across heaven and earth with towering ferocity. At this moment, his reason had already been swallowed by extreme fury. Caniz's direct, burning, unmasked hunting gaze, along with the wanton and sarcastic insults, deeply stung the arrogance carved into his bones. Who was he? He was the son of the Egyptian sky god Nut and earth god Geb, with a noble bloodline and an illustrious background. He was the lord of authority wielding the Red Land desert and governing the storms of all directions. Since his birth in the Egyptian heaven and earth, his talent had been exceptional and his strength advanced by leaps and bounds all the way. In just a few thousand years, he broke through all the way from a newborn deity, firmly ascending to the level of middle divine power and securing the position of leader among the new generation of gods. His noble bloodline, powerful strength, and exceptional talent had fostered Set's arrogant and violent personality since birth. There had only ever been him looking down upon all living beings and hunting all things. But now, he was actually regarded as prey and wantonly mocked by a foreign deity who looked young and tender. Humiliation, fury, and unwillingness intertwined completely, scorching his soul. Set's eyes were bloodshot, his beast-like ear flaps vibrated violently, and a cold, vicious oath was squeezed between his pearly white teeth. The divine authority within his body began to churn restlessly, and divine power surged crazily. Holding his weapon, as his spear waved, tens of thousands of hectares of yellow sand formed huge waves, charging straight at the location where Caniz was. Among gods, close quarters melee combat rarely happened. Generally, they fought using divine authority, with divine power serving as energy supply. This was also why there were strength classifications among gods. The divine power within a god of the weak divine power level was like a small motor, whereas reaching the middle divine power level could be understood as a V8 engine. The energy produced by the two was simply not on the same level. And Caniz's response was also very simple. He held Charybdis aloft with one hand, and the breeze, hurricane, and tornado within his body all began to emit brilliant radiance. Hurricane formed a wind wall, isolating the space around Caniz for protection. Breeze lingered around his body. After merging with Redemption, the healing divinity of Breeze received an epic level enhancement. These were all just backup measures Caniz used to provide protection for himself, not worth mentioning. His true killer move still had to be the Tornado Divine Authority. Under his manipulation, Tornado coordinated with the Rotation Divine Authority inside Charybdis to successfully display an outstanding performance of 1+1 greater than 2. Taking Charybdis in Caniz's hand as the base point, a giant black tornado 10,000 jong in diameter suddenly appeared, spinning wildly, surging, and expanding. This tornado was not an affiliated wind type like Landspout, but a new wind type born by combining with the Rotation Divine Authority, focusing primarily on extremely high rotational speed and emphasizing strangulation. On its inner walls, it was covered with tens of millions of wind blades condensed to the extreme. Under high-speed rotation, they formed an airtight, offensive and defensive absolute killing domain. The tens of thousands of hectares of yellow sand overturning and falling across the sky, having just touched the boundary of the black tornado, were cut, crushed, and stripped away layer by the high-speed wind blades. What? Seeing this, Set was greatly shocked, his face full of disbelief. This was his proud divine power yellow sand, containing the mature authority of the desert desolation, capable of decaying all things and obliterating divine power, extremely vicious. Yet in front of Canas, it didn't even have time to corrode, instantly disintegrating completely. The thick sand grains were forcibly torn apart, and the yellow sand across the sky was completely absorbed and devoured by the storm, without even a trace of residual ore leaking out. The first clash between the divine authorities of Canas and Set. Set, defeated. The yellow sand scattered across the sky vanished with the wind. The desert authority, once powerful enough to crush deities, was shredded by the pitch-black tornado into the finest dust of heaven and earth, leaving not even a trace of the aftermath. Witnessing this scene, Set was struck as if by lightning, his body trembling violently. His once crimson, furious eyes instantly filled with unbelievable horror. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. An uncomposed roar broke through his teeth, echoing and shaking the space. He had always possessed extreme arrogance and absolute confidence in his own strength, talent, and authority. Yet today, his proud desert authority was so easily crushed, dissolved, and annihilated. Moreover, by a deity who looked so fragile. Outsiders watch the spectacle, while insiders watch the technique. Set also possessed a wind-type divine personality, so he could naturally perceive the essence of Canas's black tornado and how astonishing its contained lethality was. That black tornado had actually been created through the compound application of divine personalities. The compound application of divine personalities, simply put, meant simultaneously stimulating and using two complementary divine personalities to condense them into a single attack. Moreover, this method of application generally appeared between a main divine personality and subordinate divine personalities. Compared to standalone use, the power of a compound attack was often much stronger, and it would also carry some special effects. For instance, water plus low temperature would form freezing, and sun plus scorching would increase the scorching damage of the sun itself. Set himself was also proficient in this path. His two divine personalities, desert and storm, were homologous, symbiotic, and perfectly compatible. After fusing, they could also significantly amplify their power, making his strongest lethal move at present. Yet just a moment ago, his full-strength strike driven by the desert divine personality was completely defeated by the opponent with almost no power to resist. Even without careful deduction, relying solely on a deity's vision and intuition, Set was incomparably clear. Even if he went all out, he was afraid he wouldn't be able to shatter that pitch-black tornado head-on. That tornado was too pure to the point of possessing only ultimate lethality with nothing else. He hadn't expected that a deity who looked so delicate and weak would act even more ruthlessly than himself when fighting. At the thought of his previous arrogant and unruly appearance treating Canas as prey, he felt a wave of discomfort. He, the god of desert and storms, Set, had become a clown. This thought completely shattered his pride. Compound divine personality application. You know it, and so do I. He refused to believe that the gap between himself and Canas could be so huge. Clearly, they were both medium divine power levels and both possessed compound divine personalities under similar conditions. Why should he, Set, lose? At this moment, Set had not yet attained the position of the Ennead in later generations of ancient Egyptian pantheon mythology, and his authority was far from complete. Yet even so, as the son of the sky goddess Nut and the earth god Geb, with talent surpassing the younger generation of Egyptian deities, his divine life had been smooth sailing. He had never tasted defeat in battles among deities of the same level, nor had he ever encountered such crushing setbacks and humiliation. This was his first external expedition in his divine life, and the best opportunity to make a name for himself and establish his divine might. He absolutely would not allow his first battle to end in a crushing defeat, turning into the laughingstock of the ancient Egyptian pantheon. At this thought, Set completely fell into madness. All rationality collapsed, leaving only a berserk fighting intent. Thus, the two divine personalities within his body completely lost control and became restless. The dual divine personalities of desert and storm simultaneously lit up with dazzling brilliance. Ancient dark divine patterns crawled all over his divine body, his meridians roared, and his authority trembled. The vast and majestic divine power was like a breached river and sea, gushing endlessly from the depths of his body, violently scouring the entire opposing battlefield. The heavy, coarse desert authority bearing desolation and death, and the sharp, swift storm authority wielding the overthrow of all things, began to merge to the extreme, mutually amplify, and fit together perfectly. The sand borrowed the wind's momentum to sweep across 1,000 miles, obliterating vitality. The wind borrowed the sand's might to transform into tens of thousands of sharp blades, grinding down the rules. This was the application method where compound divine personalities 1 plus 1 was greater than 2. The rolling yellow sand surged upwards, carrying the berserk gale that tore everything apart, condensing into a giant yellow tornado spanning heaven and earth. The gravel inside impacted at high speed and rubbed crazily. Every grain of sand was comparable to a divine weapon, shattering vegetation and annihilating airflow wherever it passed, while a desolate and dead sense of despair suppressed all directions. At this moment, Canas discovered that Set's attack looked seemingly identical to a natural disaster in his past life's desert, a sandstorm. As the phenomenon produced after the mutual fusion between desert and storm, a sandstorm. Canas murmured to himself in his heart when he saw this scene. In terms of the development and application of divine personalities, Canas was indeed inferior to Set. This was the drawback of having spent too short a time as a god. Had Canas not accidentally awakened the rotation divine personality when creating Charybdis, he would probably still be using a single divine personality as his main attacking method at this time. That black tornado created based on the tornado and rotation was already Canas's strongest offensive means currently. I want to tear you to pieces. Set's eyes were crimson, looking like a mad demon. His hoarse and frantic roar resounded through heaven and earth, and with one hand, he violently pushed forward. The sky-blocking giant sandstorm suddenly rolled out, like a yellow sand hell overturning heaven and earth, carrying a monstrous might that destroyed everything, locking tightly onto all directions around Canas, sealing off all dodging retreats, and fiercely suppressing downwards. Its scale was so large that even the deities of the two worlds outside the battlefield couldn't help but pause abruptly. Although they had already started fighting, both sides were actually quite restrained, not fighting until their eyes turned red like Canas and Set. It was nothing more than you punching me kicking you, or both sides manipulating authorities to bombard each other. The ancient Egyptian pantheon side was outmatched in numbers and mainly focused on defense, while the chaos side actively held back their strength. First, to prevent the opposite side from becoming desperate like a dog over a wall and bringing irreparable damage to Chaos World. Second, they were also just a tiny bit afraid of death. After all, anyone with eyes could see that they had a huge chance of winning this resistance war. Yet if they died here, wouldn't they miss out on all the glory and benefits brought by victory? Resurrection also took time. Once the war ended, who would leave benefits for you? Therefore, under the blessing of the above buffs, the outnumbered ancient Egyptian pantheon could actually barely resist the attacks of the deities from Chaos World. Of course, sun god Ra could naturally see through the intentions of the chaos deities. He felt happy about this and supported it with both hands and feet. Now his goal had changed from invading the world to bringing his team back completely unscathed. Amidst this tense yet slightly eerie atmosphere, all the deities of the ancient Egyptian pantheon and the Chaos pantheon cast their gazes upon the two gods fighting the most fiercely across the entire battlefield. Canas, the god of wind, wisdom, and redemption. Set, the god of desert and storms. Within the ranks of the Egyptian pantheon, the assembled deities wore relaxed expressions, for they understood Set well. This move by Set was already his strongest strike. Even deities of the same rank whose domains were suited for combat would not dare claim they could survive this move. Therefore, they had great confidence in Set, believing that he would achieve victory in this battle, gouge out the divine persona of that false god from another world, and display it as a manifestation of his own strength and glory. Within the camp of the chaos deities, Astraeus furrowed his brows tightly, his mind taut as he secretly clenched his nerves for Canas. This grandson of his had only been born a few mere centuries ago. What could a mere few centuries even accomplish? He usually took several centuries just for a single nap. Even the primordial deity Tartarus, quietly watching from the sidelines, had a trace of contemplation flash across its eyes. Canas must absolutely not die here. It needed his help, and it needed Canas to become stronger in the future to help it slow down or even counter-erode the spacetime rift. Consequently, Tartarus had already made up its mind that if Set's ensuing attack posed a threat to Canas, it would directly make a move to annihilate the other party. Anyway, through observation, it found that with Pontus's strength, holding back that sun god was still not a problem. Thus, the intangible aura of the abyss quietly lurked, and the atmosphere of the entire space grew increasingly oppressive. Witnessed by the deities of both realms, the clash of domains at the center of the battlefield collided with a booming crash. The pitch-black, biting, orderly, and domineering dark tornado crashed head-on into the towering, dusky, heavy, and desolate giant sandstorm. There was no earth-shattering, heaven-rending violent explosion as imagined, only the harsh scraping sound of two ultimate domains devouring, wearing down, and neutralizing each other resounded all around. Hiss! The sharp, unnatural noise of the wind and sand clashing echoed endlessly. Space continuously trembled and distorted, and the chaotic aftershocks of the rule spread in layers, yet they were tightly confined to the core battlefield by the surrounding violent air currents. Under the gaze of all the deities, the dusky sandstorm, which had originally possessed monstrous might and covered the heavens and earth, began to rapidly thin out and collapse in layers the instant it touched the pitch-black tornado. The desolate yellow sand raging across the sky could not shake the black tornado by even a fraction. Instead, it was entirely absorbed, pulled, and engulfed by the violent and precise wind force within the tornado. Those sharp sand grains originally meant to annihilate all things and cut apart divine bodies failed to become Set's lethal weapon of slaughter. Instead, they were seized by Canas's power, recondensed, and transformed into brand new lethal blades for the Black Tornado, exponentially amplifying the might of Canas's tornado. This. In the rear, Set, who had been using all his divine power to maintain the offensive, froze entirely in place, his pupils contracting violently, his face full of dullness and bewilderment. He could not believe the scene before his eyes. In merely a few seconds, the yellow sandstorm that had originally blotted out the sun and possessed formidable deterrence rapidly shrank, dimmed, and disintegrated at a speed visible to the naked eye until it was annihilated. Only that dark tornado still stood firmly in place, carrying the yellow sand as it rapidly advanced toward Set's direction. With his strongest lethal move broken, the divine power within Set's body fell into a brief vacuum period, and his domain fell dormant. The only thing left he could use for combat was his own indestructible body. In this regard, the ancient Egyptian pantheon differed from the Greek pantheon where Canas resided. Compared to the Titans, Egyptian gods placed greater emphasis on their own physical strength, enhancing their power by transforming parts of their bodies into animals. Set's elephant-like snout, beast head, divine bones, and physical body were the fruits of his refinement. When it came to close-quarters combat and physical brawl capabilities, he far surpassed Titans of the same level. Yet right now, all advantages were completely invalidated. Having briefly lost his domain, exhausted his divine power, and with his divine persona dormant, Set possessed a formidable physical brute strength in vain, with no way to unleash it at all. Around Canas's body, hurricane barriers surrounded him layer upon layer, while the breeze emitted a rich healing aura to provide therapeutic effects for Canas. One defense, one healing, protecting himself so tightly that not a single drop could leak through. The tornado pressed down upon his body, and a desperate situation had arrived. Set finally snapped out of his daze. Extreme fear and despair completely shattered all his arrogance and madness. The shadow of death had never enveloped him so tangibly before. This noble-born Egyptian deity finally truly experienced the panic of defeat at this moment. Driven into a desperate plight, Set completely cast aside all arrogance, squeezing out the very last shred of his remaining divine power to drive his physical body. Veins bulged and muscles tightened on his beast-transformed divine body, attempting to rely on brute physical force to frontally shake the dark tornado and forcefully break through. Boom! The pitch-black tornado crashed heavily into Set's physical body. The seemingly indestructible body rapidly cracked under the twisting slaughter of the dark tornado, oozing golden divine blood, while its hard bones emitted an unbearable, creaking roar. Set let out a muffled roar of pain, his body instantly blasted away like a tiny stone, his entire aura completely collapsing, and the very last remaining strength for resistance was thoroughly wiped out. In this battle, Set could be said to have been crushed in an all-round manner, lacking even a shred of the power to resist from start to finish. Why? Clearly, you don't restrain me. The pitch-black tornado slowly receded, turning into countless strands of wind that lingered around Canas, bearing no trace of its previous violent appearance. Facing Set's confusion, Canas did not answer, instead responding with actions. Treading upon the lingering wind, his figure flickered as he teleported directly before the battered, flying Set. With his right hand, he precisely gripped the other's neck, tightly confining his body with divine power and suspending him in midair. The young god's bright eyes held not a shred of pity, only the fanaticism and joy of a successful hunt. So weak, and yet you still wanted to hunt me. What a foolish question. My noble wisdom tells me not to answer such questions. With his throat locked and suspended in the air, Set's divine power had completely dissipated, and the divine persona within his body had grown so weak that it lost its radiance. Extreme weakness and the despair of near death overwhelmed his mind. Yet even so, Set still maintained a deity's arrogance and self-esteem. He did not beg for mercy, instead staring fixedly at Canas, his eyes brimming with unwillingness and venom. You won this battle, false god from another world. But just you wait, I will surely return. The underworld cannot make me sink, and the glory of the sun will eventually flow within my body once more. Even though Set had no strength left to resist at this moment, he still refused to yield to Canas, instead continuing to spout arrogant nonsense. Death. No, 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 I am not as merciful as you think. Canas never wasted words on his prey. He thoroughly enjoyed the process of hunting, the anticipation of pursuing prey, the thrill of the kill, and the sense of fulfillment from harvesting prey were considered by Canas to be the most gratifying parts of the hunting process. And at this moment, the long chase and bloody battle had finally come to an end. Set, this beast of a deity from another world, arrogant and unruly, had completely fallen into his control. Then, the next step was to harvest the most valuable thing on the prey. In the air, Set was covered in blood, the sweat droplets on his beastly head clearly visible, and his thick nose trembling violently. At this moment, Set's battered body could no longer support his former arrogance and overbearingness. His weakened soul began to stir, and through Canas's cold and indifferent gaze, he caught a glimpse of undisguised plundering and cruelty. As a deity who had lived for thousands of years, Set was by no means a fool. Moreover, before the battle, he had also harbored the exact same thoughts that Canas had now. No. That is my divine spark. A shrill and piercing scream broke through his throat, carrying extreme fear and despair, roaring loudly across the entire sky. He was not afraid of death, because death was never the end for a deity. But the divine spark was different. The divine spark was the origin core of a deity and the foundation of everything. Death could be resurrected, and a destroyed body could be reshaped. Yet once the divine spark was seized, one would become an incomplete deity, not to mention the drop in strength. If one had bad luck, they would likely fall from the divine altar, never to rise again. For Set, who had been arrogant all his life and viewed power as everything. This was far more cruel than death. Extreme panic completely shattered Set's final sanity. Disregarding his injuries, his battered body struggled frantically, his limbs flailing in vain as he tried to break free from the imprisonment of the surrounding wind currents and escape this doomed fate. Yet how could the methods laid down by Canas be something a loser like him could break free from? Hey, losers have no right to keep their spoils of war. Now, everything you have belongs to me. No. Stop. Set's soul, physical body, and everything else began to stir violently. This was the instinct of a living creature. Upon perceiving the fatal crisis of his divine spark being about to be stripped away, and having no power to resist, Set let out the most despairing wail of his life. Scream all you want, the more you scream, the more excited I get. Canas subconsciously licked his lips. He swore he was not a pervert, but Set's feeble struggle and humble wailing truly hit the G-spot of the unknown dark side deep within his heart. Under this stimulation, Canas abandoned the idea of slicing open Set's body with wind blades and thought of a more direct method. Clenching his 5 fingers into a claw, under the witness of the gods, he directly pierced through Set's battered body, reaching straight into the depths of the other's body. Hiss. Whether it was the gods of ancient Egypt or the gods of chaos, upon seeing this scene, they all involuntarily drew in a cold breath. Who said deities lacked empathy? Any deity who saw this scene would subconsciously cover their most vulnerable spot. Feeling the sensation from his right hand, Canas couldn't help laughing. He finally understood why both deities and humans loved hunting so much. This feeling of dominating everything, the feeling of harvesting prey, was simply too exhilarating. In the eyes of the watching deities, the smile on Canas's face at this moment formed a stark contrast with the fear and despair on Set's face. Ah! Set let out a heart-wrenching, shrill scream, his body beginning to twitch and curl up involuntarily, his whole body spraying golden divine blood like a gushing spring. He could clearly perceive that deep within his body, the divine spark that had been integrated with him since birth was being forcibly dug out from his body by an external force. Every shred of the divine spark being stripped away was a soul-crushing torture to him. The excruciating tearing pain of the divine spark being stripped away far surpassed the pain brought by any physical injury. This was a deprivation of the essence of life. If one had to describe it, it was like someone cutting you in half with a single blade and then taking away half of your body. You could only live on painfully relying on that remaining half of your body. Canas ignored the strange and terrified gazes of the deities, and also ignored Set's pig-slaughtering screams, placing all his energy on stripping the divine spark. This was his first time stripping a divine spark, and his operation was not yet very proficient. Cutting off the connection between Set and the divine spark would take him quite a bit of time. The divine spark was Set's true essence. To strip away the connection between the core essence, it required Canas to use his divine power to cut it apart bit by bit, which was extremely draining on divine power and energy. However, what people found strange was that during the time Canas was stripping Set's divine spark, not a single Egyptian deity came to stop Canas. After all, this was delicate work. If someone interrupted, Canas was very likely to have all his previous efforts wasted. Just like that, under the witness of the deities from both sides, time slowly passed. After a long while, Canas abruptly pulled with his right hand, and a heavy, hexagonal rhombus-shaped earth-yellow crystal core abruptly appeared in his palm. This was Set's desert divine spark. It was just that the desert divine spark's light was dim at this moment, greatly damaging its inherent aesthetic. It's desert. I thought it was storm. Seeing this, Canas shrugged. His primary target was definitely the storm divine spark of the same origin as himself, but after all, it was his first time operating it, so a small mistake was completely normal. He could responsibly say that stripping Set's divine spark consumed more divine power than the battle with Set earlier. With his intermediate divine power level, he even needed time to recover his divine power. Is this a divine spark of the earth attribute? It really is quite different from my divine spark. Is it because the world rules are different? Or is it because the authority attributes are different? Canas placed the divine spark in front of him, carefully tinkering with and examining it. The touch of this divine spark felt heavy and hard, covered with layered patterns, exuding an aura of desolation and barbarism. This desert divine spark, whether in appearance or rules, was vastly different from Canas's divine spark. Canas did not know whether this was due to differences in world rules or differences in divine spark attributes. However, it didn't matter. Canas already had experience, so stripping the storm divine spark next time wouldn't take that long. By then, Canas would be able to determine what the actual reason for the difference in divine sparks between himself and Set was. No. Don't come again, I beg you. In the short span of a few breaths after losing the desert divine persona, Set's strength had already plummeted from the mid-tier divine power to the weak-tier divine power level. Having lost power, Set was left with only boundless stillness and remorse. With his power drained and his divine authority severed, he wasn't far from death either. At this moment, Set no longer possessed a shred of the piercing majesty of an Egyptian genius deity. What remained was only boundless stillness, bone-chilling despair, and bone-eating, heart-burning monstrous remorse. The divine persona was his pride, his foundation, his future, and his everything. Yet now, it had been reduced to a trophy casually toyed within the hands of his mortal enemy. A deity's dignity and future glory were all crushed, plundered, and usurped by the outcome of this defeat. The ultimate powerlessness and the humiliation of being violated bit by bit eroded Set's remaining bottom line. He was finally afraid. It was a thorough, complete terror spreading from the depths of his soul. High and mighty deities, with endless lifespans and overlooking all living beings, had long since looked past life and death. Yet the most terrifying punishment in this world was never death, but rather falling from the divine altar, losing power, and living on in ignoble survival. Watching with his own eyes as his divine persona was stolen by another, watching his divine authority controlled by another, watching everything he owned become wedding garments for another. This taste of being thoroughly plundered, wantonly violated, and replaced was 100 times more cruel than death. He had lost the desert forever. If he were to lose the storm as well, he would truly fall from the divine altar. Set, who had been arrogant, unruly, and unyielding just a moment ago, completely dropped all his pretense, discarded a deity's final pride, and with a trembling, battered body, begged the young exotic deity before him in deep humility. I beg you. Spare me. I am willing to submit to you and become your subordinate deity. His hoarse, fractured voice trembled ceaselessly. Gone was half of his previous madness and ruthlessness, leaving only extreme humility and terror. His crimson eyes welled with despairing moisture, and those once decisive and murderous eyes now held only trembling entreaty. Yet toward his humble plea, Canas turned a blind eye, his eyes devoid of a single ripple, holding only the coldness and composure of a hunt coming to a close. His fingertips gently closed, steadily gripping that heavy, archaic desert divine persona he had gouged out with his own hands within his palm. An earthy yellow, warm halo flowed across his fingertips, and a vast, desolate aura leaked out in wisps. That was the nature of the desert, as well as the embodiment of its divine authority and origin. The heavy texture spread from his palm to his soul, and a rich sense of harvest swept through his entire body, a faint flash of pleasure sweeping across Canas's eyes. This was the most perfect final gift of the hunt. Canas bet that after this war ended, he would definitely acquire the hunt or other divine personas of the same kind. Looking at this divine persona and then at the pleading Set before him, Canas didn't speak. He merely raised his hand and gently pressed this dim desert divine persona into his own body. Rumble. A muffled, heavy sound exploded within Canas's body. Originally, only emerald green wind currents lingered around Canas. But now, golden yellow sand grains were added. Sand and wind surged with a boom, lingering around him. As the person closest to Canas on the field and the sole former owner of the desert divine persona, Set witnessed this intensely cruel plundering and violation with his own eyes, seeing every detail of Canas accommodating and absorbing the desert. He watched wide-eyed as that divine persona that originally belonged to him completely attached, permeated, and integrated into Canas's body, taking on the other's form. That was his divine persona, his divine authority. His everything. Yet at this moment, this thing that exclusively belonged to him was completely turning its back on him and submitting to his enemy. What caused Set even more heart-wrenching pain was that he could clearly sense the joyful resonance coming from the desert divine persona. Although this was a normal phenomenon of the divine persona receiving nourishment after being depleted, in Set's eyes it appeared exceptionally jarring. Something that originally belonged to him was actually becoming better, stronger, and more complete inside someone else's body. An unspeakable sense of suffocation and humiliation enveloped his entire body, and Set felt his head feel immensely heavy, as if a hat of extreme mockery had been clapped onto it. The desert divine persona he had treasured all his life completely changed hands at this moment, thoroughly possessed and tamed by the enemy. This ultimate sense of betrayal, violation, and replacement, watching with his own eyes as everything he owned was plundered and replaced, with even his own divine persona submitting to another, was a mental slicing far more cruel than gouging out the divine persona. No. Set's pupils completely dilated, his entire body trembling violently as golden divine blood continuously dripped from the corner of his mouth, his voice fractured and hoarse, carrying a despair akin to a breakdown. No. That is my desert. It's mine. It shouldn't be like this. At this point, Set was filled with incomparable regret. He shouldn't have proactively provoked Canas and treated him as prey. Once upon a time, the desert was born with him, and the storm traveled with him. But from now on, he had nothing. Even though the storm still belonged to him at this moment, in his view, having it taken away was only a matter of time. His divine persona ultimately embraced the enemy who killed him. What irony and sorrow this was. And before him, Canas, who had absorbed Set's desert divine persona, grew increasingly powerful, his aura beginning to climb layer by layer. Wind and sand fused and enhanced each other, setting off his divinity to become increasingly vast, majestic, and unfathomable. He lowered his gaze to look at Set, who was broken, frantic, humble, and disheveled before him, his expression somewhat hesitant. After fusing with the other's desert divine persona, Canas no longer quite wanted to kill Set here. The reasons were complex, but they were worth Canas pondering. Just as Canas was pondering, a scorching, resplendent golden divine light suddenly tore through the clouds, the searing divine light forming a straight line as it attacked toward Canas's location. The sun god Ra had taken action proactively. And at the very moment Ra made his move, the primordial deities of the Chaos faction, Pontus and Tartarus, also made their moves. Pontus brandished the trident in his hand, and a massive wave directly smashed toward the region where the Egyptian deities were located. As for Tartarus, it lightly pointed its finger toward Canas's location, a flash of black mist swept by, and Canas's figure directly vanished. The sun god Ra was helpless and could only abandon the idea of continuing to hunt down Canas, withdrawing to defend and ensure that the Egyptian gods under his command suffered no additional casualties. As for Set, who had already lost the power to resist, he was pulled back by a deity who manipulated vines. Although Set had been beaten miserably in this battle and suffered heavy losses, his status remained much higher than that of most low-tier deities. Rescuing this crown prince could also be considered a merit. Golden radiance filled the sky as the soft, heavy light of the blazing sun slowly descended, shrouding the entire battlefield. Sun god Ra stood high in the air, his divine power fully unleashed. Although Ra was currently not at his peak strength, he was still the creator sun god of the ancient Egyptian pantheon, holding dominion over the earth, sky, and underworld. Sitting upon the supreme authority of the Egyptian pantheon, with an accumulation spanning eternity, he was definitely at the peak of the deity level. The scorching divine light slowly spread out, slightly stagnating the flow of rules between heaven and earth. This power was so immense that it drew everyone's attention. The originally chaotic battlefield was also affected by this aura and gradually calmed down. All the deities instinctively stopped their attacks and looked up at sun god Ra flying in midair. There was no other way, this aura was simply too powerful. It was so powerful that they could not even move freely under its suppression. Thus, the prolonged slaughter suddenly ceased, the aura of carnage filling the sky slowly faded, and the entire world plunged into a heavy, dead silence. The gods, having just experienced a fierce and tragic duel, each returned to their positions with tense minds, silently watching the opposing faction as no one dared to easily reignite the flames of war. The gods of chaos were the destined victors, and the opposing leader was clearly about to unleash a major ultimate move. They certainly did not want to be dragged down with him. Therefore, they changed their positions, successively standing behind Pontus and the primordial marine pantheon. This was one of the goals Ra wanted to achieve by actively unleashing his power. Only in this way could he demonstrate that he had the strength to perish together with the enemy. Even if his side fell into a disadvantage here, as long as Ra was still alive, he could still inflict heavy casualties on this group of otherworldly deities. Clearly, his deterrence was successful. At the same time, the deities of the Egyptian pantheon began to retreat, protecting the severely injured and defeated Set. After the previous battle, they had discovered that their group simply could not defeat the opposing side, causing their morale to plummet and their ranks to waver. Even though sun god Ra displayed his formidable strength, their fighting spirit had dropped significantly. Just as the situation reached a stalemate, another figure quietly intervened in the battlefield. Tartarus, the primordial god of the abyss, took a light step and silently appeared beside Canas. This noble and powerful primordial god noticed Canas's abnormality at this moment. Canas's usually composed expression changed. He slightly furrowed his brows, his expression sinking and heavy, with a lingering gloom haunting his features, indicating that his state was currently experiencing problems. The root of this abnormality came from the desert divine persona that had just integrated into his body. Inside Canas's body, an invisible conflict of rules was currently playing out. After completely absorbing the desert divine persona, Canas felt the huge hidden dangers of rashly absorbing an exotic divine persona. This core authority born from the ancient Egyptian pantheon system had internal rules, origins, and legal frameworks completely different from the operational system of Chaos World. To put it bluntly, these two worlds could be regarded as two completely independent and different systems. And divine personas were a part of the underlying code in each system. Although the divine personas of the two worlds were theoretically the same, their nature and logic were completely different. Supposing that fire in Chaos World generated high temperatures by burning objects, then fire in ancient Egyptian mythology generated high temperatures through self-heat release. Although the manifested result was the same, its fundamental logic and underlying code were completely different. This desert divine persona carried an ancient Egyptian divine persona completely different from the divine personas inside Canas. Two mutually incompatible systems forcibly coexisting immediately triggered rejection and conflict between them. To put it colloquially, it was a bit like suffering from maladaptation to the local environment. The divine personas inside Canas and the desert divine persona of the ancient Egyptian pantheon began to continuously clash, friction, and resist each other. Two forces of completely different systems engaged in a tug-of-war and mutual checks within Canas, constantly consuming Canas's divine power and energy. Fortunately, having undergone the previous overdraft-style battle, coupled with the damage brought by Canas excavating and stripping it, the desert divine persona's state was already less than one-tenth of its former self. Rules colliding, authorities attacking, origins destroying one another. At that time, what Canas would have to endure would not merely be this mild discomfort that required patience, but rather the severe trauma of soul tearing and divine power conflict. Fortunately, these problems were not unsolvable, they just required some time. High above, sun god Ra looked down at the Egyptian deities below whose morale was low and battle power severely depleted, and then looked at the flourishing and numerous chaos faction, a resolution already forming in his heart. Although Set was not favored by the Egyptian gods, his strength was by no means weak among deities of the same level. Yet such a battle-hardened deity was beaten so miserably by a young deity of the enemy that he almost lacked even the strength to resist. Individual strength was lacking, and the overall quantity was also lacking. Even Ra could not see any hope of victory in this battle. Meanwhile, Tartarus was likewise disinclined to continue fighting. After the previous battle, the ecological environment of this region had already been nearly destroyed. And this was still the result of controlling the intensity of the battle. If they truly fought with all restraints dropped, this region would probably be erased from Chaos World from then on. On one side was a lack of strength and a desire to retreat, and on the other was a desire to resolve the trouble quickly, protect the world, and likewise avoid a protracted battle. The extremely tense battlefield confrontation quietly ushered in an opportunity for loosening. Tartarus raised its eyes to look at sun god Ra high in the sky, its deep and indifferent voice echoing through the entire void, breaking the dead silence of the battlefield. Retreat now, otherworldly deity, I grant you the mercy and tolerance to survive. Among the deities present, aside from the Egyptian gods who had been beaten out of their wits, Tartarus had the strongest desire for a truce. The nearby shattered places were all its territory. That fellow Pontus had a great time fighting, but Tartarus's territory was completely wrecked. What? Just let them go like this? On what grounds? Pontus became somewhat displeased upon hearing this. He still wanted to kill all these exotic deities and use those fellows' divine personas to well and truly strengthen the power of the primordial marine pantheon under his command. Especially the leading fellow. If he could devour him, wouldn't his own strength become the strongest among all the primordial gods? Therefore, Pontus did not want to let the other party go. Even if Chaos World would suffer heavy damage as a result. But clearly, this idea of Pontus did not have many deities supporting it. Except for those not so bright members of the primordial marine pantheon under his command. Sun god Ra's gaze narrowed slightly as he remained silent for several breaths. It wasn't that he didn't want to retreat, he was mainly afraid that the opposite side would pull some conspiracy or trick. However, facing this situation, he couldn't come up with any good solution, so in the end, he could only slowly nod, the brilliant divine might around his body gradually converging, and the scorching aura of the blazing sun shrouding heaven and earth completely fading away. After all, if one could live, who would want to die? Ra had a hunch. If he died here, even if he could be resurrected later, his own authority would definitely suffer a certain loss, which was something he did not want to see. After all, war served interests. As the conclusion of the truce settled, the lingering warmth of the fires of war slowly dissipated. The Egyptian gods retreated very quickly, fleeing toward the spacetime rift like a swarm of bees and leaving their backs completely exposed to the enemy. Sun god Ra was the last to leave. As the most powerful deterrent of the Egyptian divine race, Sun god Ra had to ensure that the gods under his command could retreat safely. Until all the gods under his command had completely retreated, Sun god Ra cast his gaze upon Pontus, Tartarus, and Canas by its side. This time he was too arrogant, thinking that the other side of the rift was the desolate world he had visited last time. As a result, as soon as his party landed, they were ambushed by a deity whose strength was on the same level as his own. Had his attributes not restrained the opponent, just Tartarus alone would probably have caused heavy losses to the gods under his command. Until we meet again, powerful otherworldly deity. Before stepping into the spacetime rift, Sun god Ra turned his head and said goodbye toward the location of Tartarus. This deity's disposition and strength were far stronger than that deity who manipulated the ocean, and sun god Ra attached great importance to an existence of this level. Upon hearing this, Tartarus withdrew its gaze and gave a response. As a veteran among the primordial gods, it was also shocked by sun god Ra's strength. In particular, it vaguely sensed that the opponent's state seemed incomplete, and this intuition made its wariness toward this otherworldly deity reach its peak. The battle is over. Return to your respective places, and do not forget what you ought to do. Canas, come with me. As the deep and indifferent voice fell, Tartarus moved slightly, directly taking Canas out of the battlefield and arriving atop a hill. This place was very far from the battlefield. Tartarus did not say much more, only demanding that Canas no longer manage the trivial matters of subsequent world restoration, and instead focus entirely on itself. Even looking across the entire chaos world, Canas's auxiliary ability was second only to a few primordial gods. But whether it was Tartarus or Pontus, both believed that Canas's primary task was to enhance his strength. As for things like repairing the world, there were naturally those lower gods to handle them. 10,000 years of theirs were not as precious as 100 years of Canas's. As for the original battlefield, at this moment there remained only a scarred and devastated earth, shattered and cracked space, and leftover divine blood, severed limbs, and rule fragments scattered everywhere. In battles of the deity level, bleeding and severed limbs were not even counted as minor injuries. And those rule fragments were not dropped by the deities themselves, but were the wounds left behind after the chaos world was injured. The essence of this war was still restrained, and it did not cause too much loss. Although the number of those Egyptian gods was small, their combat power and experience were both elite, so the Egyptian gods who fell in this battle were not many, at best a little over a dozen. The chaos side was likewise the same. Several unlucky deities died on the battlefield. Most of those fellows were subordinate gods, unlucky fellows and cannon fodder sent out by their respective master gods to scout the way. Yet their causes of death were quite uniform. They were all pushed to the front by their own gods, becoming stepping stones and cannon fodder for scouting the way. However, their sacrifices were also meaningful. Among the dozen or so fallen deities of the ancient Egyptian pantheon, there was more or less a part of their credit in it. To put it simply, the ancient Egyptian pantheon lost more than a dozen deities, and its morale suffered a massive blow. Meanwhile, on the chaos side, although the gods lost were not many, a part of their homeland had been battered to the point of being scrapped. Therefore, from then on, the two worlds officially entered a long stage of recuperation. The gods of chaos returned to their respective positions, those who needed to repair rules repaired rules, and those who needed to treat injuries treated injuries. As for Canas, he returned to Karst Island and began a slumber in seclusion. He needed to digest the desert divine persona within his body and transform it into a state consistent with Canas's underlying rules. To achieve this goal, Canas needed to spend a vast amount of time and energy. Therefore, undergoing a period of slumber was the most suitable course for him. Thus, the days slowly passed amidst stable recuperation and silent slumber. As the flames of war completely ended and the world was gradually repaired, the gods gradually pulled themselves out of the post-war exhaustion, but a hidden danger, as time passed, was increasingly clearly exposed before all of them. That was, the present chaos world had no god-king. Cronus was the second-generation god-king, but he was absent from the previous war, and at this time he was still in another world. They did not even know whether Cronus was alive or dead. People's hearts are unpredictable, and deities are no exception. Therefore, they defaulted to Cronus's era having become a thing of the past. The gods now needed a powerful, martial, and charismatic ruler. Thus, starting from who knows who demanding it, the calls to elect a third-generation god-king began to grow higher and higher. After all, before this war, the deities of the chaos world were generally in a state of fulfilling their respective duties, with strong independence, and the god king was merely default to having a higher status. On ordinary days when heaven and earth were stable and the gods had friction but never major wars, such a loose pattern could still be maintained, and they even felt like fish in water. But after experiencing this cross-border invasion by the ancient Egyptian pantheon, all deities realized the disadvantages brought by this loose pattern. In emergencies, there was no leader for unified scheduling and issuing commands. All deities fought on their own, advancing and retreating without order, with chaotic coordination, needlessly wasting massive combat power and opportunities. Not only that, having no leader had another disadvantage. When facing foreign invasions, no one made the final decision or coordinated the overall situation, leaving them only able to passively engage in battle and make hasty counterattacks. Even if they luckily achieved victory, after the war no one reorganized order, repaired the world, reviewed the campaign, or established a reward and punishment system. The entire world was fraught with chaos and low efficiency. Looseness meant extremely low efficiency. Being masterless meant having no backbone. Adding these two together meant that the fault tolerance rate of the chaos world was extremely low. Once there was a failure, the combat power of the entire world would be shattered, and it would never again be able to organize an effective resistance. This time, they were purely lucky. The individual strength of the Egyptian gods was not stronger than theirs, and their numbers were also fewer than theirs, which was why it ended without danger. However, luck was by no means eternal. They certainly could not pin the future of the chaos world on luck. In this battle, although the ancient Egyptian pantheon failed, the gods of chaos also learned a part of things from them. Was the Egyptian pantheon powerful? Powerful. But what was the foundation of its power? Sun god Ra. That god king of the ancient Egyptian pantheon. It was precisely because sun god Ra presided over them, relying on his own powerful strength and calm command ability in the face of battle, that the ancient Egyptian gods, who were weaker than them in both number and strength, successfully retreated. Therefore, the gods of the chaos world also wanted such a powerful god king to lead them. This fit the persona and personality of the gods in Greek mythology very well. Nominating a new generation of the divine king was a major resolution sufficient to reshape the order of the entire chaos world pantheon. Such a critical shift in divine authority could by no means be led by ordinary titans' deities. Ordinary titans' gods lacked prestige and were weak, and their horizons were relatively narrow, mostly bogged down by pantheon interests and private disputes. If they spearheaded the selection of the divine king, it would only intensify conflicts and ignite a new round of division and turbulence in the already fragile post-war state. Therefore, the gods turned their eyes to those few primordial gods at the top layer of the chaos world. Only these ancient beings born at the beginning of chaos, who personally witnessed the creation of heaven and earth and bore the origin of the world, possessed sufficient qualifications, heritage, and prestige to preside over this divine king election that would determine the future of the divine realm. However, the number of primordial gods was scarce to begin with, coupled with the fact not every single one of them was suited to step forward and manage affairs. Therefore, after careful consideration, the gods quickly screened out a lot of unsuitable candidates. The goddess of night Nyx, and her elder brother and companion Erebus, were the first batch to be eliminated. The strength of the two primordial gods was indeed very strong, firmly occupying the very top tier of the chaos world. But their personalities were reclusive and lonely, inhabiting the border zone of chaos and darkness all year round, completely drifting outside of everything. Even during the last foreign enemy invasion, the melee of gods, and the turbulence of heaven and earth, they always watched coldly from the sidelines, merely tacitly allowing the gods under their command to participate in the war, while they themselves did not take part in the war. Wanting an existence with this kind of personality to preside over the divine king's affairs had a success rate of almost zero. Followed closely to be weeded out was Urea, the god of mountains. This god symbolizing the primordial mountains, ever since losing in the struggle with the first-generation divine king, had been sleeping deeply in the deep layers of the earth, never waking up once for tens of millions of years. In a sleeping state, it completely lacked any ability to take charge of affairs, possessing only a nominal title, but being practically useless. Like the first-generation divine king Uranus who had long since completely exited the sight of the gods, he was directly crossed off the candidate list by the gods. The last one to be eliminated was Tartarus, the god of the abyss. In the last round of defensive war against the cross-border invasion of the ancient Egyptian pantheon, Tartarus stabilized the defense line at the first instance, protecting the Chaos world from suffering more damage, and established outstanding merits for the subsequent victory. Its military achievements and absolute strength were unquestionable. But its personality was cold and rational, and its actions were decisive and too straightforward. To the gods, it was more like a tyrant, and moreover a tyrant with extremely strong strength who was difficult to resist. If it presided over the divine king general election, I'm afraid it would only select a god just like it to be the divine king. At that time, their days would not be easy. In just a few decades, the gods completed all screening and elimination work. Although the most important thing the gods did during these few decades was holding banquets, after all, having achieved victory, everyone certainly had to enjoy themselves thoroughly. As for serious business, it was casually brought up while enjoying themselves. Very in line with the gods, work efficiency and time concept. In the end, they reached a conclusion. Among the remaining primordial gods, only Gaia the goddess of the earth and Pontus the primordial sea god possessed all the qualifications to nominate the third-generation divine king. Gaia nurtured all things and gods, and although her personality had slight flaws, she never made mistakes on major issues. For a long time, Gaia had been deeply respected by all gods, even if only on the surface. Pontus compared to Gaia was a bit inferior. Before the war with the ancient Egyptian pantheon, Pontus's reputation was only slightly better than that of Tartarus. The primordial marine pantheon were all a bunch of brainless brutes, and Pontus, as their father god, certainly wouldn't be much better. But after the last war, Pontus's outstanding performance added a lot of points to him. Upon learning that they were nominated by the gods, Gaia and Pontus agreed to this proposal without hesitation. Since then, the nomination work of the third-generation divine king officially started, and a brand new era belonging to chaos slowly opened its curtain. A millennium of time flowed quietly. Over this past millennium, the chaos world divine realm had always maintained a stable and peaceful situation. Gaia and Pontus steadily adjusted order, repaired the world, and began to select sufficiently outstanding gods from various pantheons as candidates. Because the previous divine king was not elected, Gaia and Pontus needed to plan various rules, procedures, and the most basic conditions for participating in the election of the divine king. Just these things cost them quite a bit of time. And during this period of time, most of the gods who had experienced the flames of war were sleeping and recuperating, quietly waiting for the arrival of the new era. It could be said that this was the most peaceful and serene period of time since the birth of the chaos world. And Canas also used this period of time to completely digest the desert divine personality within his body. Or rather, he recreated a desert divine personality. The underlying code of the entire divine personality was rewritten, and the nature of the divine authority also underwent tremendous changes. The desert in Set's hands was pure desolation and dead silence. Its core of divine authority was plundering the vitality of all things and solidifying the desolation of the earth, being a cold and ruthless dead zone where not a blade of grass grew, representing the most cruel, tyrannous, and utterly destructive side of the desert, with only withering and demise, harboring no vitality or hope. But after a millennium of polishing and remaking by Canas, this thoroughly transformed desert divine personality possessed a completely different new core and form. It completely broke free from the single shackles of dead silence and desolation, shed the paranoid attribute of pure destruction, and metamorphosed into a brand new symbol with a unique ecology and hidden vitality. After Canas modified it, the desert became an independent, complete, and resilient closed-loop ecosystem and food chain system. There were dormant creatures hidden in the desert, and hidden vitality beneath the scorching sand layers. Dead silence and desolation only circulated on the surface, but deep within its core, vitality remained dominant. Yellow sand could bury decay, end withering, and purify the redundant dead silence of heaven and earth. At the same time, the desert could likewise shelter living creatures and increase life. Upon the desolate desert, a resilient vitality exclusive to the wasteland could likewise be born. Destruction and nurturing coexisted, withering and rebirth symbiosis. This was the desert that Canas recognized, and also the truly complete desert. Facts proved that Canas's thoughts were right. This point could be seen from the several new divine personalities that appeared after he finished modifying the desert divine personality. Oasis, scorching heat, evaporation. Among these three divine personalities, Oasis was the most special, and also the main reason why Canas believed he was right. The remaining scorching heat and evaporation were actually naturally created by Canas when he modified the desert. These three divine personalities were not primordial gods, but subsidiary divine personalities subordinate to the desert divine personality. Although their value was not high, it was enough to prove that Canas had walked the right path. After fusing with the desert divine persona, Canas discovered that the compatibility between sand and wind was unexpectedly so high. And the extremely rapid circulation of wind currents sweeping across the world, coupled with the mass and impact force of the sand grains, was simply a match made in heaven. His divine power grew increasingly complete, and his foundation also increased by a lot. The authorities of wind and sand merged completely. Speed, defense, offense, and control. Almost all of Canas's shortcomings were filled in, and his overall combat power completed a leap-style explosive growth compared to 1,000 years ago. The desert divine persona brought him many abilities he did not possess before. Not only that, but 1,000 years of slumber increased his control over the divine persona and his planning for future paths. To put it simply, Canas had already figured out the path leading to high divine power. By simply stepping by step developing the divine priesthood he currently possessed, along with the divine power accumulated by his main body idling on a daily basis, it would only take 10,000 years for him to naturally advance from middle divine power to high divine power. 10,000 years. This amount of time might be very long for humans and demigods, but for gods, it was merely a tiny bit lengthy. This little bit of time was not even enough for a weak divine power to elevate its own strength by one tier. Let alone the fact that Canas's strength at this time was middle divine power. Since the harvest was full, Canas decided to wake up from his slumber. To use his words from his past life, he was coming out of seclusion. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Karst Island. Compared to 1,000 years ago, today's Karst Island could be said to be much more prosperous. Not only did a large number of titans appear on the island, but several settlements of the golden humans had also taken root here. They were all ordinary lives that had voluntarily joined under Canas's command over the past 1,000 years. In the previous war, everyone saw Canas personally dig out the divine persona of that otherworldly god. Whether it was a primordial divine persona was unknown, but the phenomenon represented by this divine persona had truly never appeared before in Chaos World. That is to say, even if that divine persona might have problems, as long as one could thoroughly understand it, they could rely on the knowledge and authority above to create a new primordial divine persona. A primordial divine persona meant the establishment of a minor pantheon. In other words, Canas could now completely establish two pantheons and serve as the lord of the pantheons. That was two pantheons. How many subordinate god vacancies there were naturally went without saying. As long as the subordinate beings had sufficient talent, resilient minds, and a little bit of luck, they had hopes of gaining Canis's favor, obtaining a subordinate divine persona, leaping beyond mortality, ascending to the divine throne, breaking free from the shackles of life and death, and wielding authority. This was the ultimate opportunity that all demigod titans and golden humans dreamed of. Only for 1,000 years, Canis had always been in seclusion and slumber, ignoring worldly affairs. No matter how they looked forward to it, no one had ever been summoned by him. But for the long-lived titans and golden humans, the last thing they lacked was time. After joining, the various ethnic groups peacefully settled on Karst Island, multiplying and developing steadily. 1,000 years passed by in a flash. Some racial individuals with strong reproductive capabilities had already developed from the initial small-scale settlements into several small tribes with sound order and prosperous populations, making the entire island increasingly thriving and prosperous. Countless living beings waited quietly day after day and year after year, looking forward to the day when Canis would awaken and the opportunity would descend. And at this moment, this waiting spanning 1,000 years finally welcomed its conclusion. A tremor without warning suddenly swept across the heaven and earth. The entire firmament shook violently, the clouds surged and shattered, and endless wind currents suddenly swept out, crisscrossing and traversing the heaven and earth. Following closely behind, boundless golden sand grains were born out of thin air, falling from high altitude and spreading in all directions, gently yet heavily wrapping around the entire karst island. Gentle and pure wind-blown sand permeated every inch of land, seeping into the soil, vegetation, rocks, and oceans. This was the authority belonging solely to Canis, which looked far less deterrent than the desert manipulated by Set. But only Canis himself knew what terrifying power those seemingly gentle and heavy sand grains could burst forth with at a critical moment. The divine might of the middle divine power level quietly bloomed. Although the primary color was gentle, its powerful life essence set it off to be extremely steady and heavy. Above the island, all the living beings who were toiling, exercising, and resting froze in place entirely. The titans stopped their strong bodies, their eyes filled with shock and awe. The awakened golden humans crawled up from the ground, raising their heads one after another to look up at the firmament, their minds trembling. The formless coercion permeated their souls, making them subconsciously bow their heads and lower their bodies, raising absolute respect and surrender towards Canis from the bottom of their hearts. This was the great power belonging to a god. Just the leakage of aura was enough to make those mortal lives prostrate in worship, or even easily crush them to death. This sleep makes my whole body feel like it's rusted. Canis transformed into his titan form, moving his body a bit uncomfortably. This feeling of the body being rusted was actually an illusion. After all, his main body had been working hard to slave away for the past 1,000 years. How could there be such a sense of sluggishness caused by a long period of inactivity? This feeling was actually an illusion that appeared because Canis's own consciousness was somewhat sluggish. Greetings to you, my respected Lord God. Just as Canis was familiarizing himself with himself, 4 figures flew up into the air from Karst Island below, who were precisely the only 4 subordinate gods Canis currently had. The 4 wind gods, Anemoi. The north wind god Boreas was winged, had a thick beard, and a tall, robust physique, being the appearance of a typical Titan god. The south wind god Notus had a similar appearance, except that his wings were half smaller than those of Boreas. As for the east wind god, it went without saying, that was the father god of Canis in this lifetime. As for the west wind god, he was the flashiest one among the 4 wind gods. Not only was his figure similar to Canis's, both being slim teenage images, but even his snow-white toga had been dyed pink by him using divine power. But this was also normal. After all, in myths and legends, the west wind god Zephyrus was the one with the best affinity with the opposite sex. Not only did he give birth to 2 fine horses, Boleus and Xanthus, with Podarge, one of the harpies. Later on, He even became the lover of Chloris, the goddess of spring. However, at this time, except for Eurus, the remaining three wind gods wore more or less fear and tension on their faces when facing Canis. Father God, you have worked hard these past 1,000 years. However, Canis didn't care. He cast his gaze onto Eurus, his tone filled with apology. During the period of his seclusion, the other three major wind gods did not dare to overstep their authority, and almost all major and minor affairs fell onto Eurus alone. Even for a god, he was probably exhausted to death. Therefore, after coming out of seclusion, the first sentence Canis spoke was to apologize to his father god for his own omissions. In his view, if he hadn't been in such a rush to enter seclusion and thoroughly explain matters, his father wouldn't have wasted time and energy for this. It matters not, my proudest child and my supreme god Canis, witnessing you step by step ascend to an even greater realm, my long dormant origin has also continuously grown stronger and filled with power. It has only been 1,000 years, even for 10,000 or 100,000 years, I would never feel weary. He stepped forward and gently embraced Canis, who had just emerged from seclusion. The movement was gentle, devoid of the hierarchical etiquette between a supreme god and subordinate gods, leaving only the bonds and warmth originating from the depths of their bloodlines. Thousands of years ago, he was the divine father who nurtured and guided Canis, acting as the other's protector. Yet, as the years shifted and fate rotated, the once immature offspring had already transformed and grown, with both strength and status increasing, ultimately becoming his supreme god instead. He calmly accepted this shift in identity, willingly bowing down to become a subject, and acting as Canis's most loyal follower under his command. It was just that this role reversal from divine father to subordinate god, even if not rejected in his heart, still faintly gave rise to a sense of trance that was difficult to adapt to. That is good, Divine Father. A trace of warmth flashed across the depths of Canis's eyes, and his tone was calm and gentle. He had always valued affection deeply, and the opportunity for his divinization all originated from Eurus. Therefore, the other's weight in his heart was unique. Even though there was nominally a distinction between master and servant, he had never treated this former divine father as a subordinate god. During the 1,000 years of my secluded slumber, Earth Mother Gaia once sent an avatar to deliver a message. Canis raised his eyes, looking toward the distant, vast Earth, speaking in a calm tone and revealing the recent core changes in the divine realm. She invited me to participate in the selection of the third generation King of Gods. Canis held not the slightest obsession regarding this. His potential was extremely high. Even without the position of King of Gods, he could still reach the supreme summit in the future, so he was unwilling to be bound hand and foot by complicated political affairs and trivial matters. Moreover, what power brings is often not only benefits, but also corruption. Cronus was the best example. I have no intention of contending for the position of King of Gods, but in my heart, there happens to be the most suitable successor. As the words fell, a name that resounded through Greek mythology in his past life slowly appeared in Canis's mind. Zeus. Zeus, who would wield lightning in the future, overthrow the second-generation King of Gods, and ascend to the position of the third-generation King of Gods. Following the memory threads of his past life, Canis was extremely clear that the rise of Zeus was inherently the predetermined destined trajectory of this heaven and earth. The authority of the third-generation King of Gods should have, and was destined to, belong to her. Only by letting Zeus successfully become the King of Gods could the established fate line be stably continued, and the alternation of all gods in the world, the rotation of authority, and the birth and fall of divine godhoods advance steadily according to the past life's trajectory. This was the safest layout that best aligned with Canis's own interests. His greatest trump card and reliance had never been these divine godhoods on his body, but the complete memories retained from his past life, the future vision of foreseeing the rise and fall of gods and the changes in heaven and earth. This unique foresight allowed him to lay out in advance, seize opportunities, precisely harvest every divine godhood, and control the lifeblood of every era's alternation. But once the fate line deviated and the historical trajectory became disordered, this greatest advantage would instantly be invalidated, and all established layouts would turn into bubbles. Therefore, stabilizing destiny and anchoring the trajectory was the most important matter for Canas at the current stage. He had to exhaust his own connections and heritage, fully support Zeus to ascend to the throne of the King of Gods, forcibly lock down the era's trend, and prevent the breeding of all variables. The only concern was that the subsequent complicated and trivial affairs of the pantheon would eventually have to trouble Eurus to manage on his behalf. Thinking of this, Canas quietly gave birth to the idea of cultivating subordinate gods and building a pantheon team. With the continuous development of several major origin godhoods within his body, some subsidiary godhoods that began to derive within his body already possessed the conditions to bestow titles externally. He could personally promote a batch of subordinate gods to share chores such as pantheon management, territory garrisoning, and task coordination, completely liberating his own energy and concentrating on layout and cultivation. It was just that the demigod titans and golden humans entrenched on Karst Island were ultimately difficult to use for major tasks. These creatures had all come to submit out of admiration over the past 1,000 years. Those who chased profit were many, while those with pure sincerity were few. Not to mention their mediocre talent, their loyalty was even less guaranteed. Canas originally had no absolute strict requirements for the loyalty of subordinate gods, but after experiencing 1,000 years of war and the polishing of affairs, he had long seen through the pros and cons. Subordinate gods with low loyalty were mercenary and lax in heart, only knowing how to shirk and evade when facing dangerous missions. Even if driven by force, their execution efficiency was extremely low, and they would even shrink back in the face of battle and become the one holding others back. As for loyal subordinate gods, they were able to absolutely carry out the supreme god's will, fearless of sacrifice and danger, and complete every instruction with ultimate efficiency. Therefore, what he needed was a batch of direct subordinates who were relatively loyal, pure in temperament, and outstanding in talent, rather than this group of opportunistic dependents on the island. These opportunists could just be used as cannon fodder. Temporarily suppressing the thought of cultivating a team in his heart, Canas looked at Eurus by his side, his tone gentle and firm. Divine Father, in the coming days, the affairs of Karst Island will still trouble you to take full charge on my behalf. I strictly obey the Supreme God's command. Eurus showed no hesitation, bowing and accepting the order. Canas did not care about the distinction between superiors and subordinates, but in order to maintain his son's majesty, Eurus had to lead by example and demonstrate the gap between superiors and subordinates. Otherwise, his three brothers would also gradually become lax, and might even disrespect Canas because of their own identities. This was something he absolutely did not allow. After arranging all matters, Canas stayed no longer. With a flicker of his figure, he transformed into a wisp of breeze, carrying fine, warm golden sand, quietly breaking through the air and speeding toward the depths of the boundless earth. The wind was his eyes and ears. And now, his eyes and ears told him that Zeus was currently walking upon the earth. That future third-generation king of gods had already demonstrated her own strength at this moment. Even though Canas's strength had progressed significantly among medium divine powers, he was still unable to truly see Zeus's true body through his eyes and ears, and even her avatar could only be seen vaguely. Regarding this point, Canas was actually very happy in his heart. This indicated that Zeus's strength was not weak, and she might even be stronger than him at this moment. As expected of the future third-generation king of gods, even without mastering lightning, her strength has already surpassed the level of medium divine power. Could it be that due to the changes in this world, Zeus has also undergone some changes? Mystery cult Zeus, Theogony Zeus, or ordinary Olympian Zeus? Canas thought silently. Compared to the latter two, he actually hoped it was mystery cult Zeus. Because this version of Zeus's authority system was more complete, her origin level was higher, and her potential in combat power far exceeded orthodox records, which was the result he most anticipated seeing. However, even though Canas had long made all kinds of preparations and expectations in his heart, the moment he truly arrived at his destination and saw clearly the figure in the open space, his usually calm and waveless mind suddenly stirred up monstrous waves. No wait. What the heck, Queen Rhea, you fucking gave birth to Zeus properly for me. After cursing Queen Rhea, Canas seriously doubted that Her Majesty the Queen might have some mental issues at the time. Otherwise. Sigh. Canas couldn't help but feel a toothache, his confused gaze looking towards Zeus, who was resting in a clearing not far away. The other party was very strong, her strength a tier higher than his own moderate divine power, belonging to the high divine power level. Moreover, she seemed to have some kind of divine artifact or authority that could shield perception. Only after Canas saw Zeus in person could he see her true appearance. But, the Zeus before him completely subverted all the cognition he had rooted in his past life's memories. In his past life, whether in texts or in orally passed down stories, Zeus was always the dignified and weighty heavenly father and king of gods who ruled over heaven and earth. The Father of gods, the Lord of all spirits. The Father of gods. Father. Do you know what father means? Ah. No matter where this word is placed or what language is used to express it, shouldn't it be used to describe a male? Yet the figure standing among the mountains and fields at this moment was completely and utterly a female. She had a neat crop of short hair. Just judging from the length of her hair, Zeus indeed had more masculine factors than Canas. Her brows and eyes were sharp and bright, lacking the gentleness and softness of conventional women. Her entire body exuded a wild, heroic spirit polished by long-term battles. To put it bluntly, she had a strong aura and was very aggressive. Her figure was tall, and her movements were vigorous and neat. Her body, accustomed to year-round combat, looked full of explosive power, every move carried the sharpness of a warrior, and at a glance, anyone would mistake her for an unyielding and belligerent deity. Yet upon careful observation, one could spot the abnormality. The slender yet resilient shoulder lines, delicate and translucent skin, and soft bone structure all proclaimed her true gender. Zeus was a woman. My God. Oh, if you were here. Canas suddenly felt the sky go dark. Zeus absolutely could not be a goddess. Although she certainly looked much more manly than Canas. In terms of having manliness, Canas, a male god, had actually lost to Zeus, a goddess. But who would have thought that the third-generation king of gods who would wield lightning, overthrow Cronus, and lay the eternal foundation of the Olympian pantheon in the future, that majestic and all-ruling heavenly father Zeus, was actually a goddess. Aside from this cognitive-shattering contrast, what shocked Canas even more was the power dormant deep within Zeus. Thunder. A powerful divine authority governing judgment and punishment. It was also a symbol of the power and status of the third-generation king of gods. Clearly, the situation in this chaos world had already diverged from his past life's memories. The divine authority of thunder was no longer something Zeus acquired after becoming the king of gods. Either she carried it naturally at birth, just like the vast majority of the primordial gods. Or she obtained it through acquired effort, just like Canas. However, if Canas's memory was not faulty, thunder should indeed be the exclusive authority belonging to the third-generation king of gods. Therefore, was Zeus still the destined future king of gods? But how was this gender to be explained? The chaos world simply did not allow females to serve as the king of gods. Canas's pupils constricted slightly, endless ripples surging in the depths of his heart. He had anticipated countless variables for Zeus, anticipating the strength or weakness of authorities and deviations in paths. He had even prepared for the possibility that Zeus was just an ordinary demigod at this time. Yet he had never expected that destiny's greatest mockery of him would be a subversion in terms of gender. This directly dealt a heavy blow to Canas, who had been racking his brains trying to push Zeus onto the throne of the king of gods, causing him to momentarily see black before his eyes. The sound of the wind in the woods suddenly stopped. This was because Canas's own emotions experienced violent fluctuations, which in turn caused a considerable degree of chaos in the surrounding air currents. Who is it? Come out. Realizing something was wrong, Zeus abruptly raised her head, her sharp eyes piercing through layers of obstacles to accurately lock onto Canas, who was hiding in the distance. The girl's voice carried a slight hoarseness, obviously from shouting too loudly earlier, but there was no cowardice in her tone, only bravery and vigilance in the face of the unknown. Sigh. Canas sighed. Since the other party's strength was already stronger than his own, and since he hadn't done anything guilty, he naturally wouldn't avoid meeting her. Thus, Canas restrained all the roaring waves in his heart, gathered away all the wind and sand, and slowly walked out of the shade of the trees. Looking at the girl's figure before him with infinite potential, he couldn't help but feel somewhat helpless. Countless speeches flashed through his mind, only to be completely overturned. What should he say? Just say she was the third-generation king of gods destined by fate. That he would personally push her onto the throne of the king of gods. By chaos. If a male god heard these words, he might believe them a little, but to a female god, such words were undoubtedly some kind of provocation or sarcasm. Hello, this powerful deity. I am Canas, the god of wind symbolizing redemption and wisdom. It's a pleasure to meet you. After walking out, Canas introduced himself to the other party somewhat uneasily. He subconsciously wanted to address her as beautiful deity, but upon seeing her neat short hair and sharp aura, he had to temporarily change the form of address. This hastily changed wording made the entire self-introduction appear exceptionally stiff and cramped, fully revealing unfamiliarity and awkwardness. Zeus opposite him quietly sized him up. The young deity before her had a handsome appearance and an ethereal temperament, with a warm and clean aura around him, lacking the usual violent tendency of the Titans. He looked quite harmless to humans and animals, not much like some hidden enemy. Especially his slightly cramped and slightly stiff self-introduction was full of contrast, inexplicably appearing somewhat pure and cute. PFF'd. A clear laugh suddenly broke the tense atmosphere in the woods. Zeus's tensed shoulder lines instantly relaxed, and the heavy vigilance and caution in her eyes completely dissipated. She sized up Canas with great interest, the corners of her lips curling into a wild arc. God of wind. You're the Canas they've been discussing. She crossed her arms and looked at Canas, her tone carrying curiosity and a hint of banter. Hiding stealthily in the dark to peep at me, and seemingly thinking about some not so good things in your mind, your way of greeting people is really quite strange. Zeus's words clearly carried a hint of ambiguity. Hearing this, Canas couldn't help but look embarrassed, wanting to retort something, but when the words reached his lips, he suddenly choked, not knowing how to explain. After all, he really hadn't controlled his emotions well at the time, and he was indeed hiding in the dark peeping at her. But the question was, why did this action of his sound completely different in Zeus's mouth? It was as if he was a pervert. Seeing Canas's tongue-tied, embarrassed look, unable to find his words, the playfulness in Zeus's eyes deepened, and a genuine smile began to spread across the corners of her lips. The newly born curiosity in her heart was completely piqued. Since her birth, whether on Crete or while traveling alone to hone her skills, Zeus had spent most of her time in solitude. During her long life, she had occasionally run into many Titan gods, demigods, and golden humans. Some of these beings were powerful, while others were weak. Yet despite this, they generally shared one thing in common. They were either violent and aggressive, bloodthirsty and arrogant, or crude and dull, driven entirely by self-interest. Simply put, they were a bunch of rough, uncouth men who did nothing all day but fight and scramble for resources. Even the more peaceful ones just shut themselves inside their temples to sleep all day, completely indifferent to everything else. She had never met a deity like Canas. His aura was clean and elegant, as clear and gentle as a breeze, without a single trace of the arrogance and hostility unique to gods. Zeus had seen far too many gods. Those fools were so arrogant they practically believed the entire chaos world belonged to them. This stark contrast and pure nature instantly aroused Zeus's deeply buried desire to investigate and play. From her birth until now, she had lived a dull and tedious life. For a unique young god to finally appear was undoubtedly her most interesting pastime at the moment. What's the matter? Have I hit the nail on the head, leaving you speechless? Zeus's voice had a uniquely husky quality, not as soft and gentle as ordinary goddesses, sounding somewhat androgynous. But to Canas, who was used to soft and gentle goddesses, Zeus's touch of androgyny was undoubtedly a plus. Zeus stepped forward slowly, leaning in slightly. Her sharp, eagle-like eyes locked onto Canas with intense aggression, concealing an unmistakable playfulness. She pressed closer step by step, refusing to yield an inch. It wasn't until the distance between them suddenly closed that Canas abruptly noticed something amiss. His own height was 4 meters, the most standard for the Titans. While not the tallest, he was by no means short. Yet the Zeus before him stood tall and slender, actually towering over him by a significant margin. 5 meters. At this moment, a subtle sense of frustration inexplicably welled up in Canas's heart. Whether one was a god or not, and no matter which world it was. For men, height was often one of the things they cared about most. Or rather, height and length were the two things they cared about most, bar none. He, the grand leader of a pantheon, a pure-blooded male chief god with top-tier combat power, heritage, and authority, was actually being thoroughly suppressed in both presence and stature by the goddess before him, leaving him feeling inexplicably weak. This was simply ridiculous. Canas grumbled inwardly, even feeling a sudden urge, to hell with acting, he should just lay his cards on the table. To tell her outright, I want to put you on the throne of the God King. But soon, he forcefully suppressed this urge. His rationality tugged at him, forcing him to calmly reassess the current situation. By now, he could no longer see the established path of destiny clearly. The change in Zeus's gender had completely disrupted his plans. Since ancient times, chaos had never allowed a female to ascend to the throne of the God King, and not even the most revered Earth Mother Gaia had succeeded. Therefore, he could not be sure if Zeus, as a goddess, could still replicate the trajectory of her past life and ascend to become the God King. But if she couldn't, then where did the lightning godhead inside Zeus come from? That was an authority exclusive to the third-generation God King, a symbol of destiny and supreme status. If the Zeus of this lifetime could truly change her fate against heaven, break the shackles of chaos's enduring rules, and ascend to the throne of the God King as a female, then her courage, strength, character, and vision would surely crush all past versions of the God King, making her the strongest and sole God King in the history of chaos. And he would be the primary contributor to ushering in a new era, reaping immeasurable future returns, connections, and opportunities. To gamble, or not to gamble? In an instant, countless pros and cons flashed through Canas's mind. Forget it. The situation had already shifted, and there was no point in dwelling on the past or fretting over variables. Rather than being passively anxious, it was better to actively enter the game. No matter what destiny held or what the rules were, he had to steady the Zeus before him first, and figure out this deity's personality and strength before deciding anything else. Please rest assured, I harbor no ill intent. It's just that after meeting you, my emotions fluctuated slightly, that is all. Canas looked up, his previous embarrassment fading as his expression returned to the composure fitting of the gods, though his tone still carried a trace of helplessness. He deliberately avoided the core issue of gender and made no mention of the selection of the God King, responding slowly with the safest possible phrasing. Seeing him instantly rein in all his emotions and regain his composure, the playfulness in Zeus's eyes grew even stronger. She liked this kind of challenging prey. At the same time, she knew that haste makes waste, so she did not press him further. She simply stood straight, looking down at Canas with a touch of casual arrogance in her voice. Canas, I have heard of your name. The wind god personally appointed by my foolish father. Only 1,000 years old, yet you have already joined the upper echelons of the chaos world. Not only that, but in the previous war, you personally gouged out the godhead of a foreign god, turning it into your trophy. Zeus laid out all the information she had heard from others, detail by detail. She did this to show that she was not entirely ignorant of Canas. For a god whose status, strength, and potential were all at their zenith to suddenly seek her out, it was absolutely impossible for him to have no plans or designs. Thus, from the moment Canas appeared, Zeus could already guess that this rising god of wind had definitely sought her out on his own initiative. Canas fell silent. If anyone ever called Zeus a fool in the future, he would absolutely split that fool's skull open. Since you know my identity, you must also be aware of the current situation in the chaos world. The god King Cronus has not returned from his expedition, and the gods need a sufficiently strong and wise leader, so. Canas hesitated, on the verge of speaking. He intended to lay out his original plans completely, even if she might perceive it as a provocation. However, before he could finish, Zeus suddenly interrupted him. So, you want me to be your queen of the gods? As expected of the god of wind who possesses wisdom. Your vision is indeed sharp and seasoned. Turning the order upside down. This is simply turning the order upside down. Zeus's words successfully broke Canas's composure, causing even the surrounding air currents to briefly pause. At this moment, Canas really didn't know what to say. Though Zeus's words were a bit bizarre, they surprisingly fit the character persona recorded in Greek mythology. After all, in his past life, even those who hadn't read Greek mythology had some understanding of Zeus's persona. He hadn't expected that even after being gender-bent into a goddess in this world, Zeus was still thinking about these things. Could it be that the rule from Canas's past life memories, girls are actually perv-wire, also applied in chaos world? So Zeus, who was naturally amorous to begin with, had directly unlocked max-level lust attributes under the boost of gender reversal. So lustful that she started coming onto him the very first time they met. Utterly absurd. A sudden chill ran down Canas's back, bringing out a dense layer of goosebumps all over his body. Others might not know the danger involved, but how could he not know? Being targeted by Zeus was a top-level dangerous event in any version of Greek mythology. Who in the world didn't know her reputation? At this moment, the authority of wisdom that Canas was so proud of seemed to instantly fail. His thoughts stalled, his mind froze, and his brain went completely blank. Forget detailed planning, he couldn't even squeeze out a proper rebuttal or excuse. He didn't even know how to evaluate Zeus right now. Should he praise her bizarre imagination and jumping logic? Or should he silently complain? As expected of you, letting instinct replace thinking and using play beans in place of a brain. Seeing Canas looking dazed, flabbergasted, and caught in a dilemma, the amusement deep in Zeus's eyes grew richer, the curve of her lips wild and untamed, fully displaying a wild and vibrant aura. Interesting. Truly too interesting. Counting from the day she was born, she had seen far too many deities, yet not a single one was as interesting as Canas. Titans whose power far exceeded her own were ones she couldn't normally encounter. As for gods of the same level, most belonged to Cronus, seeing them only made her angry, and meeting them meant either engaging in heated conflict and violent fights, or exchanging harsh words before leaving. As for weak gods and demigods whose strength was far inferior to hers, they were even more servile and humbly submissive, utterly boring. Only Canas was different. Upon their first meeting, the loneliness, hostility, vigilance, and irritability that had lain hidden in her heart for thousands of years softly melted away in his gentle, clean aura. No need to fight, no need to be vigilant, no need to disguise, no need to force bravery. This was Zeus's most authentic and relaxed self. At this moment, she was merely an ordinary young girl who, upon meeting someone pleasing to her eyes, couldn't help teasing him and feeling drawn to him, vivid and pure. The teasing in Zeus's eyes turned increasingly sweet, without a trace of malice, leaving only the playful mischief and frankness unique to youth. She leaned in slightly, drawing close to Canas once more. Her tall figure comfortably blanketed him, her overbearing posture carrying a domineering atmosphere. Her warm breath gently brushed against his ear, her voice husky and lazy, infused with just the right amount of flirtation and amusement. What's wrong? Can even the god of wisdom be rendered speechless? Or is it that you don't feel that way about me? Hearing this, Canas didn't care about Zeus's reaction and immediately expressed his refusal. I don't feel that way, so please don't misunderstand. Canas hastily refused and even took several steps back. At this moment, his mind was completely focused on self-preservation. What a joke. This was Zeus, the ultimate top stud running through all of Greek mythology, whose lovers and children filled the sky. If he really got involved with her, wouldn't he never lack cuckold hats to wear in the future? Hoping for luck just because Zeus's gender had changed was completely out of the question. Because in his past life memories, Zeus went for both men and women, not only transforming into a male to enjoy himself, but sometimes even transforming into a female to enjoy pleasure. Chances were, Hera's green hats back then could circle the entire chaos world. Canas didn't want to end up like that. He didn't want to get tripped up by romantic affairs right at the start. And he certainly didn't want to become the very first unlucky god of wind at the opening chapter of this future god king's long romantic history. Seeing Canas avoid her like the plague, Zeus froze on the spot. She instinctively looked at her own body. Her figure was pretty good. Although her curves weren't exceptionally pronounced, she still possessed a unique charm. Besides, based on her observations earlier, when Canas looked her over, the expression on his face was clearly somewhat moved, indicating that she should still be very attractive. So, was there another problem? Zeus raised her eyebrows and looked at Canas, who had retreated over 2 meters away, the cryptic look in her eyes completely erupting. She loved tough prey like this. Docile sheep might be tasty, but what always fascinated people most was the untamable eagle. She, Zeus, loved eagles the most. And falconry was also Zeus's favorite personal hobby. Now, she had the eagle. As for how to make this eagle obey her, that would depend on the methods of her, Zeus, the god of thunder. Your eyes tell me that you do have feelings for me. Besides, those 2 brief pauses in the wind are enough to prove that what you're thinking inside seems quite different from what you say. Zeus was in no rush to approach Canas. As a master eagle trainer, Zeus understood that to achieve the goal of taming, one had to take it step by step slowly. First, eliminate the other party's vigilance, then gradually gain his trust, make him get used to her presence little by little, and bring the relationship between them closer to an inseparable degree. Only then would the basic conditions for taming be fulfilled. Once the conditions were met, Zeus could fully display her skill as a master eagle trainer, and reshape this proud eagle, Canas, entirely to her liking. So, what on earth are you thinking? Although this is only our first meeting, my intuition tells me that there is definitely a deep fate connection between us. Thinking of the future where she successfully tamed Canas, Zeus felt her body, which had been somewhat quiet, grow excited once again. She didn't know why either. She didn't feel this way at the beginning. But seeing Canas dodge her like a startled fawn, coupled with spending more time together, she noticed that there seemed to be something about Canas drawing her in, making her instinctively want to get closer to him. It was just that Zeus's idea of getting close might differ from the conventional sense. After all, she was no delicate goddess, she had plenty of strength and methods. Something's wrong. Something is 10,000% wrong. Canas's divinity and intuition blared frantically in his mind, driving him to leave this place as quickly as possible. Otherwise, something bad would definitely happen. In this regard, Canas trusted his intuition implicitly. So, without a word, he followed the guidance of his intuition and transformed into a breeze, fleeing the spot immediately. The person opposite him was Zeus, after all. Though there was a slight issue with her gender, according to his initial contact, her persona and personality were likely still pretty much the same as in his past life. Definitely the ultimate stud among studs, a true god of studs. I wonder if this world has a godhead of stud. If it does, that godhead undoubtedly belongs to Zeus. Canas cursed silently under his breath. While fleeing, Canas realized that he had actually overlooked several extremely important issues all along. First was his own uniqueness. In this chaos world of filial piety, where family bonds were thin, Canas's existence was truly a breath of fresh air. He had a father god who loved him, a fact that already beat 50% of the gods in Chaos World. And Eurus likewise had a son who loved him. This beat the remaining 50% of the gods. Thus, Canas was one of the few male gods in the entire Chaos World who possessed a gentle and tranquil temperament. Moreover, just as he had felt a slight flutter seeing Zeus's tomboy appearance, Zeus probably felt the exact same way looking at him. Most gods in Chaos World viewed tall, muscular, and sturdy physiques as beautiful. Some of their muscle blocks were even bigger than Canas's head. But what about him? His physique was well proportioned, and his height was merely the standard 4 meters for the Titans race, a whole meter shorter than Zeus. So in terms of appearance and temperament, Canas appeared much more delicate than other Titan gods. But Canas swore he was definitely not sissy. A height of 4 meters combined with agile, well-proportioned muscles like a leopard's was enough to prove his male hormones were off the charts. It was just that in Chaos World, this level of delicate really counted as a bit effeminate. Well, even if those rude muscular gods called him a femboy, he couldn't refute them and could only silently accept it. So, was Chaos World going to stage a love story between a femboy and a tomboy? That was bordering on downright bizarre. Ahem. Therefore, all these factors resulted in Canas being vastly different from the mainstream aesthetic values of Chaos World in terms of appearance, personality, and temperament. The second point was that Canas had underestimated the terror of fate. The most terrifying thing about fate was that even if you added countless variables, the final outcome still could not be changed. This was something Canas had only just realized. Hypothetically speaking, he meant, hypothetically. If Zeus really could become the third-generation king of gods of Chaos World as a female, then who would become her queen of gods? That unique, male god queen, the very first since the creation of Chaos World. Relying on wisdom, Canas successfully deduced the most suitable candidate for the position of queen of gods. Himself. As everyone knew, the reason Zeus could become the king of gods was inseparable from the help of one person. Métis. That Oceanid goddess who governed wisdom, Zeus's lover. It was precisely with her help that Zeus used medicine to rescue her siblings from Cronus's belly, cast him out of the palace, and subsequently crowned herself as the third-generation king of gods. But now Zeus's gender had changed to female, unless that Métis could also change gender and become a male god. Otherwise, Canas couldn't imagine how that wise goddess would throw herself headlong into such a fiery pit. Love could blind wisdom. In the Greek mythology of his past life memories, Métis fell right here. So, if she lost such an important figure as Métis, how would Zeus become the third-generation king of gods? On this point, fate gave Canas the answer. Métis wasn't the only one with the godhead of wisdom, didn't he, Canas, have it as well? Fate merely required Zeus to ascend to the throne of the third-generation king of gods with the help of the god of wisdom. It never specified that Métis had to undertake this duty. Why did Canas try every possible way to find Zeus as soon as he exited seclusion? Why did Zeus's favorability toward Canas skyrocket like a rocket after just meeting him for the first time? In all of this, fate itself must have been fueling the flames behind the scenes. It just so happened that at the beginning, Canas's own thoughts aligned highly with fate, so he didn't feel anything amiss. Now that Canas had relied on his wisdom to notice something off, calm reflection allowed him to figure out the whole cause and effect. He was the greatest gift fate had bestowed upon Zeus. If he became the queen of gods, then authority would be shared between them. Wind, rain, thunder, lightning. They would have them all complete. Moreover, besides his powerful combat abilities, Canas's support capabilities were top tier in Chaos World. The breeze bringing solace, healing, and redemption, the home defending hurricane, or the tornado and desert used for combat and self-defense, all these turned Canas into a nearly perfect, flawless chosen, queen of gods. More importantly, Canas had a great personality. At the very least, he wouldn't be as jealous as Hera, acting like a brainless villain who insisted on picking on a group of other victims instead of demanding an explanation from the sole perpetrator. So, was he actually quite suitable to be the queen of gods? Thinking up to this point, a chill instantly ran down Canas's spine, and he shook his head furiously like a rattle drum. He didn't have a cuckold fetish, he would rather stay single his whole life than become the queen of gods to that big stud Zeus. As for using his own charm to conquer Zeus and shape her into his liking, Canas expressed zero confidence in that. Zeus's nature was innately like that. Even if he could kill Zeus, it would be impossible to keep Zeus obediently tied to his side. Simply enough, Canas decided not to care about the troublesome matter of selecting the third-generation king of gods. He would leave these headaches to Gaia and Pontus. As for Zeus, Canas declared he would stay far away from her, as far as possible. Hadn't he seen that after meeting that big stud just once, the flames in that big stud's eyes wished they could burn his clothes to ashes and throw him onto the bed to enjoy thoroughly? He had no intention of becoming Zeus's lover or queen of gods. Meanwhile in the mountains earlier, watching Canas's retreating back as he fled in panic, the desire for conquest in Zeus's heart had reached its peak. I remember you now, Canas. Zeus stuck out her tongue, licking her lips with an inscrutable expression. I thought you were a proud eagle, but it turns out you're a cute little rabbit. No matter, I can also make raising rabbits my most important hobby in life. Canas flew at top speed all the way back, taking only 2/3 of the time he previously took to successfully flee back to Karst Island. Through his initial contact with Zeus, Canas had unilaterally placed her on his blacklist. In the more than 1,000 years since his birth, Zeus's name was the only one on his blacklist. This showed just how much psychological shadow and harm that fool Grand Stallion had brought upon him. Sigh. The future of the Chaos World is truly worrisome. Returning to his Temple of Wind, Canas transformed back into his Titan form, sat down on his throne, and sighed. He suddenly felt that the future of the Chaos World seemed completely dark. Canas, what's wrong with you? I feel like you've become a completely different person after going out. Just then, Eurus, the god of the east wind, walked into the main hall. As the current, old housekeeper, of Karst Island and even the entire wind pantheon, Eurus was the only one who dared enter the main hall without knocking. As soon as he entered the hall, he saw Canas sighing bitterly, constantly mumbling things like, the Chaos World is bound to fall soon, and, being targeted by Zeus means my purity is doomed. In Eurus's memory, he had never seen Canas lose his composure like this. He couldn't understand the former. They had clearly just won a war and defended their homeland world, so why would Canas say the world was doomed? But Eurus understood the latter sentence completely. His son seemed to have been targeted by another god. Zeus. Why did that sound like a male god's name? HS's. Could Canas be? Eurus sucked in a breath through his teeth. It was true that the atmosphere in the chaos world was quite open-minded. But all of those changes only occurred after Zeus ascended to the throne of God King. Before then, although the chaos world had no concept of ethics, conflicts between the same gender were quite rare. However, his son indeed looked a bit delicate and weak, so it was entirely possible he might be targeted by some gods with special preferences. Moreover, his son was by no means weak in terms of either power or prestige, being considerably stronger than an ordinary intermediate deity like himself. Therefore, someone who could make him worry to this extent must possess power at the level of a high deity or even above. Realizing this, Eurus felt it was his turn to step up. Thus, he took the initiative to step forward, intending to solve this trouble for Canes. And the method was very simple. Call the parents. Although Canes was already the master of a pantheon, his pantheon was encompassed within Creus's celestial pantheon. As Canes's great-grandfather, Creus would be more than happy to help his infinitely promising great-grandson. But after listening to Eurus, Canes merely shook his head helplessly. Zeus. She should be called Zeus. She is actually a goddess. As for the name, I didn't quite catch it clearly, but it should be called something like that. Eurus's interruption successfully reminded Canes that he seemingly hadn't asked for the name of this world's female Zeus yet. Since the gender had changed, was it possible that the name might change as well? Canes didn't know, nor did he want to know. Right now, he only wanted to rely on his divine authority of wisdom to devise a way to escape his fate of becoming the God Queen. If it weren't for Zeus being a primordial god symbolizing lightning and possessing immortality, Canes would have even considered slaughtering Zeus directly. Oh, a goddess. Then that's fine, that's fine. Hearing that Canes hadn't fallen into the kind of trouble he imagined, Eurus's immediate reaction was relief. As for being pursued by a goddess, wasn't that completely normal? His son had immense potential, was a high-ranking member of the Titan pantheon, possessed formidable strength, and was so gentle, wasn't it only natural for him to be pursued by goddesses? Seeing Eurus's reaction, Canes knew what his old father was thinking even without using his divine godhead of wisdom. Helplessly waving his hand, he signaled for the other to leave him to quiet down in peace. Under the other's hesitant expression, Canes held his forehead helplessly, pondering how he should fight against this fool fate. Truth be told, wisdom was indeed a remarkably powerful godhead. Spending merely 100 years, he thought up a solution with a very high success rate. This method could not only resolve the trouble brought by Zeus, but also help Canes better set up his plans to plot for those unknown, powerful godheads that had yet to appear. As for this method, Canes actually had Zeus to thank. For if she hadn't actively mentioned it, Canes probably wouldn't have thought in that direction at all. That's right, the solution he came up with was very simple and pure. Since Zeus becoming the God King brought him more harm than good, what if it were reversed and he became the God King instead? If everything went smoothly, Canes is the future God King and Zeus is the future God Queen would share their divine authority. Canes's various wind attribute godheads, as well as his own desert, would have to be shared with Zeus. So conversely, lightning could likewise become Canes's authority. This way, the ultimate outcome of fate wouldn't change, lightning would still remain the authority and symbol of the third-generation God King. If thought about from this angle, the lightning within Zeus might not even have been born for Zeus herself. Lightning was born for Canes. Moreover, if Canes remembered correctly, Hera's original godhead of marriage was supposed to be acquired and awakened after attaining the divine status of God Queen, right? Bound by the godhead of marriage, Zeus should be able to restrain her, grand stallion, nature, right? In fact, he wouldn't even need Zeus to restrain herself. As long as she didn't cuckold him, he would actually quite prefer Zeus to direct that stallion energy towards him. Haha. What made Canes even more thrilled was that he no longer had to consider how to overcome hardships to push the female Zeus onto the throne of God King. He was a male god himself, so gender factors wouldn't be a drag on him in the slightest. Having thought through all this, Canas felt a sudden wave of total enlightenment. Coincidentally, Gaia had sent him a message several hundred years ago inviting him to participate in the selection of the third-generation God King. Originally he didn't want to go, but after shifting his perspective, he already viewed the throne of the God King as something already in his pocket. I've decided. In order not to become a tragic character in mythology, and not to be cuckolded by Zeus, I must become the third-generation God King of the Chaos world. The reason Canas had decided to participate in the selection for the third-generation God King after spending only a century was partly due to what Zeus had said, and partly because he had suddenly uncovered a memory deep within his mind, the memory of sending his avatar to another world. In that pure white space, Pandora had once referred to him as Chaos's God King, symbolizing natural disaster and eternity. Logically speaking, it was impossible for Canas to forget such a spoiler-like title. But the problem was that after Canas's avatar returned to the Chaos world, he seemed to have completely forgotten about it. Had Canas not devoted all his energy over the past century to reflection, he might never have recalled this memory again. This indicated that there was definitely something wrong with Canas's own memory. Mnemosyne, huh? Canas immediately had a suspect in mind. She was the embodiment of memory, the sovereign over the recollections, cognition, and legacies of all living beings, a titan goddess who presided over all remembrance in the world, opposing the river Lethe. Memory. These two words alone were enough to explain everything. The memories of all things in existence and the pasts of the gods were all under the domain of Mnemosyne's authority. Since she could stabilize memories, preserve legacies, and engrave the passage of time, she could naturally also alter memories, strip away the past, and seal away the truth. And only she could perfectly erase a specific core memory without alerting Canas himself. Canas finally understood why he had always felt like he was forgetting something ever since he returned. Pandora's phrase, God King of natural disaster and eternity, was his greatest secret and the foundation of his envisioned future path. Yet that part of his memory had been directly hidden. What was her true motive? Did she simply not want him to ascend to the supreme position? That shouldn't be. Canas shook his head. Although he wasn't particularly close with her, they had no grievances. Only when he grew stronger could the Chaos world prosper more. As a goddess, she had neither the ambition nor the qualifications to become the God King, so there was no conflict of interest between them, and she had no reason to stop him. Or was this actually fate playing tricks again? Not wanting him to know the answer in advance, deliberately letting him move forward in ignorance so that the future could unfold smoothly. That reason sounded much more plausible. After all, anything tied to fate was always profoundly mysterious. If learning the news of him becoming the God King in advance actually caused him to fail the election, he truly wouldn't even have a place to cry. Oh, wait, maybe he could even hide in the arms of the third-generation God King, Zeus, as her first lover and cry there. That would be truly bizarre. At the thought of Zeus, Canas felt a headache coming on. To be honest, he didn't want to marry Zeus and have her as his god queen. Even though Zeus in this life was female, and due to Cronus, she didn't seem as wild as in later legends where she only knew how to be a stud. But the problem was that stereotypes are hard to break. The name Zeus was already bound to negative terms like promiscuity and being a stud. Even if Zeus could become a loyal and qualified queen of the gods, it was hard for Canas to treat Zeus like he would other deities. But if he wanted to become the God King, he couldn't do without Zeus's help. Others might not know, but how could he not? The third-generation God King of the Chaos world was the most special. Only a deity who commanded thunder was qualified to hold the position. The third-generation God King ruled the sky and thunder, possessing the supreme authority to judge all things and regulate order. They were the embodiment of the universe's highest authority and the natural order of heaven and earth, the sole guardian of order in a chaotic world, symbolizing absolute justice and majesty. Thunder was not only a manifestation of ultimate power, but also an exclusive symbol of fair order and supreme authority. It was an indispensable core foundation for the third-generation God King and a hard requirement for ascending to the supreme throne. The historical facts of his past life had long proven everything. Ever since Zeus ascended to become the third-generation God King, the speed of prosperity, the stability of order, and the progression of living beings in the chaos divine realm had far surpassed the eras of the previous two God Kings, inaugurating an unprecedented golden age. In other words, to firmly anchor the layout of the new era and smoothly secure his eternal divine throne, Zeus was a key factor he could neither bypass nor avoid. Canas let out a soft sigh, the hesitation in his eyes slowly fading away, replaced by a calm certainty. Let's do this. At this thought, Canas gritted his teeth, stomped his foot, and decided to go all out with her. At worst, he and Zeus could have a political marriage. If there was no love, so be it. After all, he only needed her authority over thunder. It wasn't that he had thought it through, but that he had no other options left. In the next instant, a breeze stirred the drifting clouds, scattering a bit of yellow sand as Canas's figure faded into the wind, flying directly toward that familiar aura of thunder. At this moment, Zeus was standing quietly atop a mountain cliff. The tall young woman had an upright posture, her short hair blowing wildly in the mountain wind, while faint arcs of lightning hovered around her. Shedding her usual mischievous, playfully teasing demeanor, she possessed a bit more of the innate majesty of a god king. Having nothing else to do, she looked down at the vast forest stretching for thousands of miles beneath her feet, sensing the laws of order flowing between heaven and earth. The breeze paused, and Canas's figure quietly touched down. He still maintained his gentle features and mild demeanor. Hearing the movement in the wind, Zeus raised her eyes. Her sharp gaze instantly locked onto the arrival, a familiar smile flashing deep in her eyes with her usual casual laziness. Yo, who is this? What's wrong? Not hiding from me anymore. During their previous ambiguous banter, Canas had been teased by her into hurriedly retreating each time, avoiding her as if terrified of getting entangled with her. Now that he had come seeking her on his own initiative, it aroused her curiosity. However, this time Canas wasn't flustered like before. He simply looked at her quietly, his expression serious and his tone exceedingly solemn, devoid of any joke. I've thought it through. Zeus raised her eyebrows, a flicker of surprise passing through her eyes. Thought through what? Canas looked up, speaking candidly and pronouncing every word clearly. Last time was my fault for acting somewhat impolitely. I apologize to you now and hope you can forgive my previous mistake. Canas was in no rush to state his real business. Instead, he first apologized to Zeus for fleeing in panic previously. His actions back then were indeed quite rude. He was clearly the one who had peeked at her first, only to run away after exchanging just a few sentences when caught, acting like a total cowardly perverted peeping Tom. Canas certainly didn't consider himself to be that kind of person. Therefore, he intended to apologize openly and generously. Oh tilde all right, I accept your apology. Zeus hadn't expected that the first thing Canas would say to her after 100 years was an apology. Such a cultured and polite act undoubtedly earned Canas a lot of bonus points in her mind. Thank you for your tolerance. And then, Canas pursed his lips slightly. Even though he had prepared himself psychologically, the words of proposal were still a bit difficult for him to say. You, me, the two of us. Just as Canas was struggling with how to confess to Zeus that he wanted to become the third-generation god king and invite her to be his divine queen, a strangely familiar fluctuation of divine power appeared behind him. Pan. Sensing this divine fluctuation, Canas subconsciously turned his head, but before he could finish speaking the name, his entire figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind only Zeus, who had yet to figure out what had just happened. Huh. Only several seconds after Canas's figure vanished did Zeus react and shout out in surprise. As a primordial god symbolizing thunder, Zeus's power was far stronger than the current Canas. The thunder hidden within the clouds served as her eyes and ears. Under her command, the lightning began frantically searching for Canas's figure across the entire chaos world. However, nothing. Why is he nowhere to be found? Including Tartarus, Zeus searched every corner and crevice of the entire chaos world, finally coming to a conclusion. Canas had vanished. That unfamiliar divine energy fluctuation, and his aura suddenly disappearing. Could Canas have been summoned by those humans from the other world? After a brief moment of panic, Zeus quickly calmed down and began analyzing the current situation. Although she had not joined any faction at present, her immense strength was enough to allow her to gather intelligence in a timely manner. The matter of humans from another world slaying gods and plundering divine authorities was something almost all Titans knew about. At the thought of Canas's tragic fate if killed and plundered of his divine authority by those humans from the other world, the thunder within Zeus couldn't help but surge to life. Even though this was only her second meeting with Canas, Zeus had practically come to view him as her personal possession. She would never allow her possession to be harmed by those inferior humans. Driven by rage, Zeus turned into a bolt of lightning and headed toward Tartarus. Since Canas had been summoned there, she might as well follow him to protect him. If you want to beg me to be your divine queen, remember to finish asking before you disappear, idiot. With a soft complaint, Zeus's figure vanished as well, leaving behind only the scorched smell left by the lightning and that faint, almost imperceptible green breeze. Pandora. What did you pull me here for? Turning around, what greeted Canas's eyes was that familiar white space. Having been here once before, Canas naturally wouldn't act as nervous as he did the first time. Huh. You actually still remember me. Did the convergence of the timeline fail? However, when Pandora saw how familiar Canas was with this place, especially that he still remembered her name, a look of shock couldn't help but wash over her face. Soon, though, she seemed to realize something. A look of curiosity appeared on her face, and she circled Canas while making tisk 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 sounds, inspecting him as if examining a novel creature. The aura of the desert. You're a Greek god, so where did you get a desert godhood? Pandora poked her fingers all over Canas's body, as if she could poke out some strange new thing from him. Obtaining the desert godhood was no secret to Canas, so he recounted the entire matter of defeating Set and digging out his godhood to assimilate it for his own use. A divine war. How boring. I didn't expect that fellow Set to lose to you. Well done. I've been sick of his arrogant, heaven comes first, he comes second, attitude for a long time. Pandora's few brief words provided Canas with quite a bit of information. First, on Pandora's timeline, the Canas there didn't seem to possess the desert godhood. Second, this world also had the Egyptian god Set in his complete peak condition. Third, Pandora and Set did not get along well. Oh well, let me get down to business. Seeming to lose interest in continuing the chit-chat, Pandora turned around with a businesslike demeanor, standing opposite Canas to explain the current situation to him. In the Huasha region, one of my children organized Fangxi practitioners to hold a ritual summoning a god of disobedience. That child is the strongest among my children, yet she has a very gentle personality. Before holding the ritual, she secretly begged me, hoping to summon a god with a gentle temperament who wouldn't proactively bring calamity and destruction to the mortal realm. As a mother who loves her children, how could I not try to fulfill her wish? Saying this, the expression on Pandora's face instantly shifted from businesslike to a tearful, sorrowful look. So you came to me. I don't buy it. But Canas was no fool. Pandora's slightly awkward acting could not gain his trust at all. Pandora didn't summon him earlier or later, choosing instead to summon him precisely when he was confessing to Zeus and inviting her to become his divine queen for the future of the chaos world. Combined with what Pandora had said during their first meeting last time, Canas strongly suspected this was some scheme of hers to stop his relationship with Zeus from progressing further. My, what are you saying? I don't understand at all. A weak goddess like me, how could I observe events in another world? And even if I could, how could a grand goddess like me stare at you like a stalker every second of the day? Even if you don't believe me, you can't disbelieve the world consciousness of the chaos world, right? Even if I left some trick on you, the world consciousness of the chaos world wouldn't sit idly by and let you bring methods from another world into your own body. Pandora spoke as if she had prepared a script in advance, directly choking back all of Canas's questions. And what she said actually made a lot of sense. Even if Pandora was stronger than the current Canas, she certainly wasn't stronger than the world consciousness of the chaos world. That was the conscious avatar of chaos, the god of chaos, and its strength was definitely the greatest in the entire world. Then can you send me back? I still need to fight for the throne of the third generation god king. For that, I cannot do without Zeus's help. Finding that he had no grounds to refute Pandora, Canas could only give up arguing with her and redirect the topic elsewhere. No can do tilde after being summoned by me, your identity has become a god of disobedience, Canas. You can only return to mythology with the help of my children tilde. With a gentle smile on her face, Pandora ruthlessly rejected Canas's proposal, indicating that she didn't want to talk any further. With a gentle wave of her hand, Canas's standing figure instantly vanished from the spot. At the same time, the originally pure white space instantly turned black, and the gentle smile on Pandora's face vanished immediately. HMPH. As if I didn't do it on purpose. That fool Zeus has been parading arrogantly on top of my head for how many eras now? Now, it's finally my turn to strike back. As she uttered these words, the expression on Pandora's face turned fierce and malicious. However, looking at the spot where Canas had vanished, a hint of worry resurfaced on her face. Wisdom, is it? Should I take this opportunity to completely eradicate this godhood from your body, Canas? But if I eradicate it right now, will you really be able to become the God King in the near future? Pandora. The moment he was forcibly pushed away from the pure white space, Canas clearly captured the repulsive force of the surging spatial laws. Although he sensed it, unfortunately, the dominion over this pure white space was entirely in Pandora's hands. Even as a titan deity of intermediate divine power who held the authorities of wind and desert, Canas was still unable to contend with her, and could only let a gentle yet irresistible force expel him. This feeling of powerlessness was truly not wonderful. Otherwise, Canas, whose personality was always gentle, would not have opened his mouth to curse Pandora. I, a dignified deity, also care about my face. Being kicked out by you like this, how embarrassing it is to tell others. Before the anger in his heart had dissipated, Canas suddenly felt that his body seemed to have settled into a certain anchor point. Thus, he opened his eyes. The originally boundless pure white world had disappeared without a trace, replaced by a deep and vast primeval forest. Ancient trees towered into the sky, their branches twisted and gnarled, and layers of leaves obscured the firmament, while dim light and shadows swayed among the forest. An aura of rules, unfamiliar and vastly different from the chaos system, rushed toward him. However, the aura of the laws here was frighteningly thin, far less than 1/100th of the chaos world divine realm, and the unique order and rules of the different world constantly rubbed against his divine body. Canas only felt that the divine power flowing within his body was slightly stagnant, and the operation of his authority also encountered a certain amount of resistance. Although he did not need to breathe, at this moment he produced a sense of stuffy discomfort, like the suffocation of a fish swimming in the vast ocean suddenly falling into the shallows. Canas slightly frowned. If the feeling of all gods of disobedience descending into a different world was the same suffocation as his, those irritable guys probably would have already begun to vent their anger at this time. But given Canas's personality, even though the current environment made him feel very uncomfortable, he was still able to erase the trace of irritability deep in his heart. He noticed that he was currently in a forest. Around him, a circle of figures quietly surrounded the area. The clothing style of this group of people was completely different from the Greek gods and Egyptian pantheon that Canas had seen in this lifetime. But thanks to his memories of past lives, Canas could see that the cut and style of the clothes on these people carried a strong ancient Eastern charm, with flowing long robes and cloud patterns embroidered on the fabric, possessing a rustic and magnificent aura. Very nice looking. After carefully observing the patterns above, Canas gave a high evaluation. The chaos world where he lived was simply a blank slate in terms of clothing, with nothing but togas. Goddesses could wear dresses or something, but the clothing styles of male gods like them almost never changed. At most, it was just like his cheap third uncle, changing colors or something. Welcome, stranger deity. If you are interested in the clothes on my subordinates, I can make the decision to gift you a set. Just as Canas was observing the clothes on the humans below, a cold and majestic voice sounded. Hearing this, before Canas could say anything, the surrounding crowd consciously parted a path, leaving an open space in the middle of the forest. A graceful figure slowly walked out from the depths of the dense forest. The woman wore a light cyan wide-sleeved Taoist robe, her ink-black long hair loosely coiled up and secured with only a quaint jade hairpin. Her face was peerlessly beautiful and calm, her skin was crystal white, and between her eyebrows and eyes there was none of the hostility exclusive to godkillers mentioned by the Grey Eye sisters, but instead it contained a distant majesty overlooking all living beings. But judging from her aura, the person in front of him was just a mortal, without a shred of divinity. But his soul kept reminding him that this human could pose a fatal threat to him. Godkiller. Canas opened his mouth, intending to ask about the other party's identity. But unexpectedly, the moment he opened his mouth, an ancient, heavy, and extremely majestic-sounding voice rang out from his throat. Canas subconsciously touched his throat with his hand. How had his throat become a deity? It could even speak for itself. Son of Epimetheus, son of man, why did you awaken me from mythology? And why did you impose the title of disobedience upon me? Could it be that you do not know, the wrath of a god destroys heaven and earth? Do you intend to use tens of millions of lives as resources for your own strength to ascend? When a deity is outside, they naturally have their own aura. Groping for a long time, Canas did not find anything wrong with his body. That voice didn't seem to come from his throat either, but rather more like it popped directly out of his body. Therefore, the situation in front of him was. Canas was touching his throat with a blank look on his face, but the majestic and heavy divine voice inside his body was acting like it had autoplay turned on, performing a solo show there. Obviously, even the human woman standing opposite could hardly bear Canas's action. The corners of her originally expressionless mouth twitched slightly, and her gaze unconsciously shifted away from Canas. Obviously, this was the human-exclusive vicarious embarrassment acting up. Ahem. No matter what, in terms of thick-skinnedness, Canas also possessed a defense force as powerful as a deity level. Hello, human of the different world, I am Canas, the wind god of the chaos world, symbolizing redemption, wisdom, and desert. Pandora said you wanted to summon a deity with a gentle personality and not good at fighting, so I came upon invitation, and by the way, to understand the customs of another world. This time, it was Canas speaking himself. As a wind god not good at fighting, Canas did not want to inexplicably lose a part of his authority and abilities when competing for the third-generation king of gods. Therefore, facing the godkiller of another world, he still hoped to solve the problem in ways other than combat. Canas. You are Canas. The god king Canas symbolizing natural disasters and eternity. After hearing Canas's self-introduction, the expression on Luo Hao's face instantly turned shocked. No, you should be Canas from the early days of Greek mythology, if you only symbolize the wind, or even before becoming the third-generation king of gods. However, this is best. The early you are the gentlest Titan's god, the true god of redemption. But soon, she recovered her senses and analyzed Kanaz's current timeline through Kanaz's self-introduction just now. Sorry, I was rude. My name is Luo Hao, and I am an ordinary human. Summoning you here this time is mainly to ask for your help with something. After figuring out Kanaz's identity, the iciness on Luo Hao's face completely disappeared, replaced by the peace and composure exclusive to a superior. That's the end of part 4. Part 5 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories.